This happened not too long ago. My family and I liked to party and get together with other relatives. I remember when we visited our uncle who lived in the province, I got together with my cousins and had a couple of drinks near my uncle's huge backyard. A little tipsy, I excused myself to pee. It was almost 1 a.m. when I walked inside their house and saw people crying. Confused and a little drunk, I ignored it and opened the comfort room door when I saw my uncle walking out. I immediately said sorry and bowed to show respect, but when I saw his face it was a little odd. My uncle is a jolly person, but his face right then looked too serious and showed no emotion. He never looked at me and just walked outside. I assumed he wasn't in the mood and maybe a little mad, so I just proceeded to do my business in their toilet. When I got out and walked close to my family who were still crying, I overheard something that chilled me to my core. My uncle had passed away last night from a heart attack. I froze and chills ran up my body. That can't be right. I just saw my uncle a little while ago, and yet he wasn't alive? I never mentioned this to any of my relatives. I feel like they'll be way more spooked than I am. I lived in a haunted townhome. Everything started suddenly and just ramped up from there. One morning around 7, I was laying in bed. I was awake. The kind of awake where you'd like to fall back asleep, but no, it isn't going to happen. My eyes were closed and I was relaxed, but I was literally about to get out of bed, and I remember it vividly. I was facing the wall, turned to face the other way into the room. My eyes were still closed, but as soon as I faced the other way, I got a distinct whisper of a little girl right in my face saying, "Hey, mister." I shrugged that one off as a mind trick, but then it happened another time on a different morning. Same situation and time frame. This time the whisper was unmistakable, and it said, "Now that it's all over, we can go towards the light." After this one, I started sleeping on the couch downstairs, but the bathroom is upstairs. I started getting this sense of dread from that staircase that got so bad I started peeing outside at night, like I would get everything I needed for the night downstairs and didn't even look at the stairs till well into daylight. Then the nightmares started, nearly nightly. I would have dreams that I'd turn the corner or go up the stairs, and there would be a little girl standing on the stairs. She was dressed in early 90s era clothes, probably around 7 or 8, and was severely burned. Now bear with me. I had a roommate who worked the same job as me. This job required 8 days in the field, 8 days off, and our schedules were opposite, so we were never there at the same time. He went to work, I was alone for a week, and then we'd switch. I had not mentioned any of this to him, so he's off shift and home alone at the end of the week when I see him on staff exchange, and he tells me he's been getting nightmares about a ghost girl on the stairs that's burned up. Then he tells me he was just sitting on his bed on his laptop and he saw out of his peripherals something small just kind of drop behind his screen. He said it was like it materialized from above him as he was not under any shelving or anything. When he looked behind the screen, there on the bed was a little girl's plastic hair clip that was half melted. I get home, and I'm not looking forward to a week in this place alone, but what else could I do? My roommate had left the hair clip on the coffee table, and I had meant to put it somewhere away from me, but I was exhausted and ended up falling asleep on the couch. That night, I had a very vivid dream, almost a force awakening that I was on the couch and had opened my eyes to a glass of water levitating over the coffee table about 2 feet. I then actually woke up, and I kid you not, the glass in that water was moving big time, like it had just been set down hard. As I'm processing this, I notice the hair clip is gone. I looked everywhere for it. It vanished from the center of the coffee table. Shortly thereafter, I moved out. Asheville, North Carolina for those interested. The Woods Townhomes. I am from Indiana, which is a quite Midwestern state in the USA. Nobody really thinks much of it, as we're generally seen as a boring state with nothing much to do. Well, outside of the small town of Usain, I had my thrills. My mother alleges that when I was a toddler, I would point at corners of the room and say, "Old man," which I don't remember. A few years later, my grandmother passed away, and I finally saw a photograph of my grandfather who passed away long before I was ever thought of. I said to my mother that he was the old man, which I do still remember. As a side note, my other grandparents had weird statues of cowboys called Card Shark that I was so terrified of and would say was the old man. The resemblance was dubious, but nevertheless it was a part of the story when I was younger. Over the first 20 years of my life, I lived at home with my parents in one of the oldest houses in our county, built around 1865. We had a hallway on the main floor, which I always had the creeps walking by, and the stairway was unnerving to say the least. I would hear noises, and my parents would tell stories of things that they would hear and say. By the time I was 14, I was starting to doubt that the house had something off about it, and almost as if it was meant to prove me wrong. I had my first weird incident. In September of 2005, I recall hearing a recorded message on our telephone. The voice was blood-curdling, very gravelly, somewhat metallic, and sounded like a person with throat cancer say, 5-year tall. The number was unlisted, and it came in at 9:45, which no one remembered hearing the phone ring for. I experienced a nightmare about it a few days later. That was the beginning of it. I always sleep with a fan, especially now, because the white noise helps me sleep. Well, on April 6th, it was cold and I kept the fan off. Around midnight, I awoke to a frightening white apparition of what appeared to be a man glaring me down beside my bed. In a second, I was able to deduce this before my covers went over my head. I've heard of sleep paralysis before, and my mind was panicking trying to reason with what I had just witnessed. Just as I was assured that I was experiencing sleep paralysis and hallucinations, the experience grew worse. The entire second story of our old house had original hardwood floors, and I heard footsteps go from my bedside to what I believed to be the other room. This was not sleep paralysis. This was something far more sinister. I was frozen, unable to bring myself from under the covers to turn on my lamp. A few minutes later, and the slow, creepy footsteps returned to what I believed to be the foot of my bed. Then I heard something I'll never forget. The apparition let out a quiet, not exactly mean-spirited growl, like an old man growl if there ever was one. And that was the end of the experience. I woke up to see the apparition again in September of that year, but since it was in front of a window where I could see car lights from, I shook it off as just that. And it didn't happen again until November 21st. Oh boy. I was in for a real surprise. I even remember the dream I was having. I was driving a red convertible Ford Thunderbird through a desert, and an unknown passenger in the front seat made the growl. I head back in April. My eyes shot open, and to my horror, I witnessed the white apparition walking briskly up the staircase which was beside my bed. I threw the Afghan cover over my head, and through a large hole I kept open, I watched as the apparition reached the landing, appeared to duck down on all fours as if to see if I was laying in bed, and then vanished through the door into the next room. But the story doesn't end there. Months later, I set up a tape recorder in the room next to mine, and upon playing it back, my family and I all heard the voice of a young girl say, "Where's my mother?" And it was distinct. In 2009, mediums came to visit, and almost right away they wanted to see the creek next to our property, which was not actually on our property. They returned and told us what was happening. Many decades before, a young girl drowned in the creek. Her family were hiding in the house but never showed themselves. A woman walked the floors upstairs, and she appeared to have perished from advanced consumption or something of that nature. The man who I'd never seen was a farmer who was angry that we were living in his house. No names were given, and the only evidence that they had were a photograph of the girl in the kitchen window sporting red hair which was braided and an unseemingly bluish face. The mediums did mention that there was something lurking outside and could only step onto the property every once in a while, and it wasn't good. Also, the stairway appeared to be a vortex where things came and went, possibly explaining the staircase sighting. For the most part, that was the end of my experiences, but the story didn't end there. In 2019, 10 years after the mediums came to see us, I had a dream one night where the girl told me that my family will be moving soon from the house and that they must. I actually took the dream seriously because the mediums told me I was supernaturally sensitive and that these things may come to me even in somnambular form. Mom and Dad didn't appear to think much of it because they were quite happy living there and had been for over 30 years. About a year or two after that, I had another dream, this one more profound. I dreamt that I was walking down a dirt road in what appeared to be the distant past. I came upon our old house, which looked like a shack in the middle of nowhere, and where an old man was chasing hens around the front porch. An old woman dressed in period clothing came to my right side and said quite clearly, "Yeah, old Jacob Meyer is an ordinary man." The name stuck out to me. So at the time I was doing ancestry research online, as I had little else to do in my free time. Using the subscription that I had, I plugged in the name Jacob Meyer, and to my shock, I discovered an obituary for one Jacob Meyer in my county. The obituary read that the old man Jacob Meyer was a pioneer in this country and had lived here since 1950 and lived 1 mile east of the nearest settlement. He had suffered a debilitating stroke and perished a few days later in 1896 in his home. My county has public access to various plant maps, which I immediately pulled up on their website, and discovered that our old house, 1 mile east of the nearest town, was indeed once owned by Jacob Meyer. Perhaps the stroke explained the weirdness movement whenever I saw him. As for his wife Martha, evidently she must be the one who passed away of advanced consumption, and who I, one Saturday morning, awoke to hearing gasping for air, for in 1906 she passed away in this house. I found her death certificate through my research, and her listed cause of death was la grippe, which in some cases can be seen as advanced consumption over 100 years ago. I never did receive full disclosure on the girl and her family. However, the original voice message said 5 years toll was correct in that my family suffered miserably in many ways for a 5-year period, and worse still, my father ended up passing away of a stroke in 2022, and my mum had to move out of the house because it was becoming too hard to not see him, for they had essentially rebuilt parts of the home. Where the realtors posted pictures online of the house, I immediately looked at them and saw the little girl standing in the kitchen door looking out. To end the story, the house was about half mile from the oldest cemetery in our county, and once I went there to find the headstone for Jacob and Martha Meyer, which I did find in a dilapidated and crumbling state. Sometime later, Mum went with me as she wanted to see it too. I remember exactly where it was, and when we came upon the stone, it had been replaced with a new one. That cemetery, by the way, was for many years being watched over by a tree that appeared to have an extremely scary face in its trunk. My friend once took several pictures of it, and the pictures all came out solid grey. My mum always said she never believed in ghosts before this house, but it made a believer of her. After the initial manifestation, it was like the house exploded with activity. It started with phantom footsteps on the stairs, up and down, all night long. We got used to this pretty quickly. It just became part of the house's personality. Then came the voices. After midnight, you could never be quite sure if your ears were deceiving you. When they began, it was like a radio stuck between stations, a lot of garbled sounds with an occasional word coming through. Gradually, over the course of about a month, they became more intelligible. We began hearing full conversations coming from the living room, knowing full well everyone in the house was upstairs. We tried several times to sneak down to catch an apparition or something, but no matter what, by the time we made it to the middle step, the voices would stop. A few months go by, and we'd regularly experience phantom steps and voices. Random things going missing and turning up somewhere totally random, taps and knocks, but have yet to catch another apparition. My mum started a new job, working nights, so she always missed all of the activity and explained away the rest. She couldn't explain the ghostly girl in the basement, but she's sure if she thought about it hard enough, she could come up with something. This part is relayed from her to me. One night, I came home early from work around midnight, and it sounded like you were all up there in the dark having a party. I was mad at your dad for letting you stay up so late, so I busted in the front door ready to chew you all out. But the living room was empty, all the lights were out, and you're all upstairs asleep. I thought about how I must have been hearing the neighbors or something and carried myself upstairs and got into the shower. While I was showering, I heard what I thought was one of you girls going down the stairs. I hollered and told you to get your ass back to bed, and I heard footsteps run back up the stairs towards your room. I didn't hear anything else, so I figured whoever it was went to bed and finished my shower. I got out and was drying off when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs this time. I thought one of you had snuck down without me knowing and was trying to get back up. I flung the bathroom door open expecting to catch one of you in the act, but no one was there. I just sort of shook it off as the house settling and went to my room and closed the door like I always do. Got dressed, and when I went to crawl into bed, I noticed the door was open. I figured I must have latched it wrong and went to close it again. I got halfway across the room before it creaked open again. I spun around, marched over, and slammed it and got into bed. I don't know how it didn't wake up your dad, but he just kept snoring. I have a hard time falling asleep. You know, I was laying in bed staring at the ceiling when out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door swing open again. And now I'm pissed off because I think the latch is broken. I get up, turn on the light and go look at it. It seemed to be working fine. So I close the door and jerk on it real hard to make sure it stayed so, and it did. Now I was curious and starting to think about the ghost stories, so I sit on the edge of the bed and watched the door. Before long I noticed the knob turning. I reached over and tried to wake Dad, but he sort of just mumbled and rolled over. The knob kept turning until the latch came free, and the door swung open again, and this time a lady walked in. She was a little old lady, skinny with grey hair wearing a flowered nightgown. Kind of reminded me of your grandma. I froze for a second. I was too shocked to do anything else. She stood there staring holes through me for a minute before I found my voice to ask who she was. She didn't answer, just stood and stared. I freaked the hell out for a minute. I started shaking your daddy and screaming at him, and he sat up like he was in a trance and looked over to where the woman was standing. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Do you see her?" He blinked real fast and squinted and said, "Yeah?" He said it so casually. "It's just that lady." I was frantic at this point. "What lady?" And then, like it really wasn't a big deal, he laid back down and fell asleep. Then I notice she's getting closer. She wasn't walking though, more like gliding. As she glided right up to me, and then through me and into the closet. It was like I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, breathe, or scream. It got so cold in the room that I could see your dad's breath. The woman then glided out the closet and back across the room and out the door, swinging it shut behind her. Once she was gone and the door closed, I gasped and gulped air like a fish out of water. I was trembling and had never been so terrified in all my life. But I tell you what, I now know ghosts are real. Personally, I've never experienced this old lady, but I know my mum's fear is palpable when she talks about it. I experienced run-ins with several apparitions in that house, my sister too, so often we named them. There was No-Face Lady, the Peepers or Peekaboo Men, and Tommy and the Cigar Man. We decided the girl in the basement's name was Laura, because she looked like Laura Ingalls. My dad was a very spiritual man who taught us to live alongside them in peace. Some of them were scary, yes, but we never experienced anything malevolent at all. Most of the time, it was like they were entirely unaware of our existence. I knew this family that grew up on the shores of Lake Monroe in Indiana. They lived on a site at the boat docks and managed the slips there. There were 3 sons living and working there with their mum. The boys and I were drinking around the campfire one night, and the eldest was telling me about how there was an abandoned town beneath the lake. Its citizens were relocated, and the valley flooded to form the reservoir for the wealthy to enjoy. I then asked for their spooky stories growing up on the lake. All 3 brothers immediately launched into an extremely detailed account of the haunting in the back room of their home. The room in question was a later addition to their log cabin. This bedroom was built later, probably in the 70s, kind of tacked onto the back with minimal insulation and cheap windows, raised on stilts to be level with the rest of the house. First they said the room was always colder than the rest of the house. I laughed and said that was normal for a cheap addition. They got serious and insisted that it could get cold enough in the room that you could see your breath, even on a warm summer's night. They had always found that room creepy, but it was their guests who really had the hellish nights there. Every time a guest stayed in the room, they always mentioned feeling a hostile or threatening presence, and some even had been woken by slaps or whispering or hissing. Come morning, they'd often find guests had moved to the couch in the den. That felt a little anticlimactic, so I goaded them a little. Surely they had a better story for me. And that's when they told me about the ghost girl. Some nights the 2 older brothers would go catfishing in the dark. That's how they first saw it. A pale white light bobbing in the darkness along the shoreline. It flickered like a fire, but it wasn't the right color. It didn't stand out because they figured it was just another person noodling like they were. It wasn't till the morning that they realized the person they'd seen had been halfway up the side of a sheer cliff, bobbing along at walking pace. After that, they'd seen it many nights but didn't talk about it much. But one time, while night fishing around 3 a.m., they finally decided to check out a little closer. This time, the light was bobbing along a low shoreline, so they approached it in their fishing boat and called out to her from behind. They could see it was a girl or woman in a white nightgown, and she was barefoot. She didn't even stop or slow down. Intrigued, and probably dumb, they circled to get in front of her and greeted her again, asking if she needed help. They swore to me, in that aggressive way that young men do when they're actually scared, that it was a little girl in a white nightgown with no face. I was told this story in 2013 on the shores of Lake Monroe by a bunch of boys who had previously been trying to act macho and flirt with me. But when this topic came up, their demeanor palpably changed. I know the details aren't terrifying, but it was the delivery that got to me. Either they had rehearsed this their whole lives, or was something that they had really experienced a few hundred feet from where we were sitting. Back in 2007, I was visiting a friend in Florence, Arizona. It's a prison town and nothing else. We went to a bar that was built pre-prohibition and was being remodeled on the restaurant side, which was decided by a full wall with one swinging door. We sat and talked with the bartender after closing hours, and she told us stories of a hidden tunnel underground that ran across the street to another building that they used during Prohibition when the cops came to bust up parties, but the tunnel had been filled in years ago in fear the road would collapse. I had to go look. The basement was unexciting, so I asked if I could explore more. She let me do my thing, and my 2 friends sat and kept talking with the bartender. I quickly realized that it was a 2-story building with no stairs. I had to ask. She told me that the stairs were taken out at least 5 decades prior because the upstairs area, which was a brothel for the entire time, wasn't safe and lost to time. They didn't know where the stairs were. There had to be a way. I started pulling away boards from the restaurant area because of the renovation, and I found it. It was a slight opening about the size of 2 stairs in the ceiling. Looking back, I was a dick for ripping out the ceiling of a historical building that people were working hard on, but I assumed it had to be in a corner, so I didn't do much damage at all. So as I lifted my head into the next story, I could smell the dusty crap of half a century smack me in the face. I pulled myself up and could see a small table with one beaten wooden chair in the window and what looked like a cabinet with alcohol bottles and felt wooden floors covered in so much dust I slipped and fell back down. The noise was enough that the bartender and my friend heard and came to make sure I was okay. When she found out I found the entrance to the second story, she freaked out, and she begged me not to go any further and pulled me back into the bar, as she told us about the resident ghost, the haunted bar with a sex worker who lived upstairs and was murdered up there. She told us all about all the little tricks she played on the employees over the years. I never told her that about halfway through her stories, there was a small spring that hung down and was visible in a circular window of the doors behind her that was swinging with the force of someone smacking it every 30 seconds or so. I don't believe in ghosts. I live in southern Arizona, Tombstone area, where ghost stories are told all the time for tourist attractions. This wasn't the case. That was one time I've seen something I couldn't believe to be true. No gust of wind. Nothing. That door was only used by me when I went into the renovation area and out again. And I fell and hadn't touched that door for at least 20 minutes. Then the spring starts flinging in circles. There was no one in the bar but myself and my 2 friends sitting next to me and the bartender. It was hours after she'd locked the door because we weren't even of age to be there. She also didn't like to close alone because the place gave her the creeps. I live my life seeking adventure, and this was one time I thought, crap, did I do something to piss off a ghost? When I was 13, my older brother, 18, and I were on our way to see a movie when we were hit by a drunk driver. I woke up in hospital 4 days later, having lost my right leg and my other leg in a cast, along with other injuries. That night, I woke up to my brother sitting by my bed, telling me that everything was going to be okay and to get back to sleep. The next day, my parents came to visit and see how I was doing. I asked why my brother wasn't with them, and they looked up at each other but didn't say anything. That night, I woke up again to my brother sitting by my bed, telling me he knows I can get through this and I need to be strong and overcome this, and to not let my injuries stop me from living life. We talked a bit, him not answering specific questions but answering more general ones. Remember asking him why he was still wearing the clothes from yesterday, because that was very unlike him to wear anything similar to what he wore the day before. He didn't answer that, but when asking him how he was, he said better than he thought he would be given the circumstances. He reminded me to be strong and keep living and not let anything stop me, and how much he loves me before telling me I should get some more sleep. That next day, my parents came again to visit me in the hospital, and I again asked why my brother wasn't with them, and they again looked at each other. And it was only after I said that I would like family visits together and not at different times, and would like my brother to visit during the day when we can talk more instead of at night, that my dad asked me what I meant. And I told him Andy had been coming to visit me at night. My mum broke down and left the room. My dad then told me that was impossible, because Andy died in the accident instantly. I didn't believe it, and argued about it, and ended up having to be sedated. That night I had no visits, and the next day my parents bore a newspaper article about the accident. Years later, my fiancée had an experience, and having never seen a photo of my brother, she described him to a T, what he was wearing. That's a story for another time, but it's nice knowing my brother is still around and looking out for me, and those I love. My grandfather died in 1995 due to emphysema and other health concerns. He was in his early 60s and left us prematurely, as he had many people who loved and depended on him, including many young grandchildren. I was only 4, nearly 5 at the time when he passed, and I don't remember much from this darker time in my life. But I do remember his funeral extremely vividly. I was in a funeral home that has multiple parlors and many hallways throughout the building. I remember being outside his parlor and seeing him across the room. We locked eyes. I walked over to him. After all, he was my grandpa, and I did not realize at the time he had passed on. We began our usual, as we were 2 peas in a pod, and had a special relationship, and we held hands and walked through the halls. Much of the conversation I do not recall, but I do remember showing him the lounge area, as that was my favorite place to be, with all the snacks and vending machines. As we approached the area that we had met at, we stopped and he said to me, "Michael, I have to go now." He had vanished, literally leaving my hand empty in the air. I can still visualize me standing there, hand empty, with a look of shock and confusion plastered on my face. The part that helps me think this was an authentic experience was this is something my grandmother, aunt, and mother remember well, and were concerned for years about. As I approached the open casket, my mother picks me up. I see my grandpa Leroy there, in his peace, and I begin, confused to ask why grandpa was in the casket, and what is wrong with him. My mother told me crying, and I remember this clearly. "Michael, honey, he's dead. He's gone now and he's not coming back." I was in disbelief, arguing, No. I just saw him. He's outside." After this, I remember us crying together, but that was all. I never spoke about it until I was 12 or 13. I was with my grandmother, and her health was wavering at the time. I'd been thinking about it a lot with her, being in that state, and having memories of my experience, and I finally broke down and told them what I remembered. Again we cried, and they didn't believe I could remember that, or that I had held onto it through all those years of childhood. They, in a way, directly corroborated my experience for me, at least solidifying it, as one final goodbye from one of my favorite human beings. As they remember the scene at the casket, they were always too afraid to ask me about it, maybe to protect me from further emotional anguish. My grandmother, for the remaining year or so she was with us, would ask me to tell the story any time I would visit her. She also claims to have woken up one day feeling my grandfather lying next to her. She said she could feel it was him, as if she went to bed next to him and woke up together. She never told anyone until I had shared my story. Back in 1978, my grandfather's oldest brother died, Uncle Ollie. I knew him as a kind of gentleman who had his leg accidentally cut off during a train accident. Several members of our family were railroad workers. Every time my grandfather would take me over to Uncle Ollie's, he would give me a brand new crisp $2 bill. I thought they were neat because of the red ink on them. Uncle Ollie would also encourage me to knock on his wooden leg. It must have been in the fall of 1978 when my uncle passed away. I remember the air being chilly when my grandfather would take me over. After he passed away, my grandfather would repeat the same routine once we got to the house. Get the newspapers off the lawn, then go inside the house and get the keys to Uncle Ollie's car, then go into the garage and crank up his car, drive it to the top of the driveway. The last time my grandfather took me over to Uncle Ollie's house was in the most bone-chilling and hair-raising event of my life so far. When my grandfather got to the part of cranking up Uncle Ollie's car, he drove the car to the top of the driveway. The driveway was sloped and hard to climb since the garage was in a valley beside the house. My grandfather got out the running car to check the mailbox. As I was standing beside the drive, which was in between the driveway and the house, all of a sudden the car started rolling backwards with no one in it. I watched in horror as the car picked up speed, rolling down the sloped driveway. The car rolled right back into the garage. To my surprise, there was no crash, bang, or boom. The car had stopped all by itself and was still running. My grandfather ran down to see what the hell had just happened, while I turned around and looked to the top of the attic window and saw Uncle Ollie smiling, the creepiest smile I had ever seen, and waving at me. Until then, I had never seen him smile, and realized had I seen him smile before he died, I would have asked to never go back over there. It's been 45 years since this happened, and I remember it like it was yesterday. This happened around 17 years ago. I was in high school, grounded. I had my computer in my room, so I had this whole setup where I'd have my chair sideways and all the lights off in my room. If I wanted to play games and sneak around my punishment, my drill was I would keep one headphone on facing the door, and any time I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, I'd turn off the screen, spin around and leap from my chair into bed and pretend to be sleeping. That way, if anyone came up the hall to check on me, I'd be asleep. I did this for years, never once failed me. But this one time was different. I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't know how I missed them coming upstairs. So I quickly did my routine a bit panicked, turned off the computer screen, spinning around on my chair and getting ready to jump. But the moment I looked up, there was a little girl standing in front of me. I can still picture it to this day. Faceless, only darkness where the face would be. Thick, black, clumpy hair. It almost looked wet. I slowly panned my head down. Tattered nightgown, dirty at the bottom, her legs disappeared into nothing, almost as if they faded out of existence. At the time, I used to debunk anything that seemed odd. I used to take pride in proving ghosts didn't exist, but it was in the dead center of my room, right in front of me, an arm's length away. The worst part were her hands. She had hands of an old woman too big for her body, and her fingernails, long, straight, probably around 6 inches in length. I turned around as fast as I could and turned on the computer screen. The room was lit, and she was gone. I couldn't debunk it. I couldn't make it come back. Never seen it since. At 16 years old, I slept with my parents that night. I couldn't sleep with the lights off for a decade. My grandmother went into a coma and died a week later. So my friends and research says it was likely some sort of spirit warning me of what was going to happen. But I still don't like dark rooms, especially that one. This happened to me back in 2017, when I was about to turn 18. For a bit of context that will be important, I seem to have the same problem that a lot of men have, where I can't find something sometimes even when it's right in my face. This deeply annoyed my mum, and any time that I would ask her to help me find something and it would be in plain sight, she would just pick it up and throw it at me playfully and roll her eyes. Back to the day in question. My mum had just been pulled off life support after being pronounced legally brain dead. The choice was up to me, and I knew that she wouldn't want to live like that. So, on the evening of the day I had to tell the doctors to pull the plug, my uncle, who had come from another state to help me get the affairs in order, had made scalloped potatoes for dinner. After I'd finished eating, I went into the kitchen to put away the leftovers. I put the casserole dish they were made in the oven and walked to the pantry to grab the cling wrap. I looked for a minute or two and couldn't find it. In my emotionally raw state, I began to lose my temper and loudly exclaim, "Where the hell is it?" After a moment or two, I saw a swift blur of movement above my head as the cling wrap flew off the second to top shelf and hit me square in the face, but not very hard. It took me a moment to process what had happened. I stood there in complete shock, and then I kind of broke down in the middle of the kitchen. I had tried to think of anything it could have been to convince myself it couldn't have been her, but I've come up empty. As a local water treatment specialist in rural central Pennsylvania, I have had some unique experiences while in some pretty creepy locations. Turns out water treating equipment is usually in the basement, along with those things that we often feared when we were little kids. Nearly 13 years ago, I was an apprentice to a soon-to-be retiring tech. The man was solid, noble, and not really someone you'd mess with. Our day's work schedule took us to Utah House. The softener needed repair, and of course the basement. We had our tools and headed down to a very obvious circa 17 to 1800 set of steps. Dark as night and musty. Already something felt ugly. I had a nauseous feeling overcome me and thought it just must have been the food we ate previously. My mental worked, with me looking over his shoulder, holding a flashlight, when from somewhere in the room a groan was uttered. I'm not kidding you, I wheeled around with that light fast to see what it could have been. The old tech spun around with me at the same time, and in the narrow light cone emitted by the flashlight stood an old woman in complete Victorian attire. Noble. My mentor hightailed it up the rickety steps before I knew it, leaving me with the spectre. As soon as my foot hit the first step, I shined the light back towards where I had seen her. Of course, she was gone. The old mentor was waiting for me in the kitchen when I finally reached the top, and I must have looked as pale to him as he did to me. He fumbled his words, but managed to get, "Did you see that?" to come out. I think it was pretty obvious the answer, yes. We never mentioned it to the current owner of the inn, but later I read about the history of the place. I don't know who the old woman was, but in hindsight, and I mean true hindsight, as that's where she was to both of us when we climbed out of the basement, I don't think she meant us any harm. I'm not even sure she meant to scare us now that I reflect on it. Kinda sad if she's caught there somehow. I had a weird experience once in a shower, in a home we didn't live in long as a child. I was taking a shower when suddenly I got a weird feeling of being watched. So I got out and put on a towel and started drying off, but I had a feeling of looking at the keyhole in the door. I looked, and there staring at me was an eyeball. But the strangest part was that the eye didn't appear to be on the other side of the keyhole at all. It appeared to be in it. I jumped up and got dressed quickly, told my mother, and she told me after talking to the last owner that they had a son who liked to watch people in the bathroom through the keyhole, especially his cousin or sister. This boy perished recently. It leaves me wondering. Me and my little sister were sitting in the living room having a conversation about some nostalgic memories we shared in our previous house. The room was silent when she and I both witnessed this foggy-looking figure walk across the room and could see the upper part of the body easier than the lower part. We both looked at each other in disbelief. I remember her mouth open in horror from it. I asked her if she just saw what I saw, and she nodded. It felt so surreal. I wonder what it could have been. In SoCal, there's a mission, San Juan Capistrano. I've seen a man, Caucasian, young, stubble beard, sandal shod, wearing a brown monk habit with this hood over his head. It wasn't crowded. It was a lovely autumn day. I've seen him several times. I also said hello to him, and he smiled with a lovely set of teeth. A hippie, I thought. He didn't answer, turned the corner, and then he was gone. His feet made no sound as he walked. I asked the clerk at the souvenir shop why he's always walking around here. There's a stool in the Catholic church. So is he a visitor like me, or does he work here, or does he come to service? She sort of blanched, saying there's people who ask, but he doesn't work or visit. It's weird. Oh, okay. So I'm not there for services or prayers, but went into the church. It was beautiful, with some painted scenes of early California people, as well as the usual Catholic statues of saints. I smelt a distinct musty smell, as well as the feeling of being watched. I said out loud, "It feels sad here. It's crowded. Many people in here?" Then I left. That evening I was in the kitchen alone, washing up some dishes and the counters. I am alone in the entire house. I heard a clatter of the crystal beverage coasters in the living area. Was it an earthquake? I went into the dining room and there was nothing there, but one coaster fell from the coffee table. I picked up all of them and brought them to a place on the counter. One of the coasters slowly rose from the counter and was suspended by itself. I look around, I'm alone. There's no wire or other way it can do this. I feel very scared, but instinctively know it's a spirit. I should not let it frighten me, because it feeds on emotions, and I said in a calm voice, very slowly, "Put that down." It does. Then I wonder, what next? I have to make it leave. I don't want a spirit in here. I've got to be polite. "Thank you. What else can you do? If you want to really impress me, do the rest of those dishes." Guess what happened next? Nothing. The other spirits I've encountered were one at a local library during a drum circle. I heard it singing like a Native American. No one else heard it. Another time it stole my thumb drive. I said out loud to please return it, that I really needed it, and it suddenly appeared. It stole other items from me, and I wasn't going to let it steal more. I asked the librarian about why my things were stolen, and this time it did return my thumb drive. She was nonplussed, and told me the basement had a ghost that sometimes does steal from patrons and employees, and that no one was allowed in the basement. There's another local library with a ghost. It used to be a very grand house when it was the residence of one of the famous families in the area. It was burned down, then rebuilt, to be almost the same as the original house. The house is now a library with several modern modifications like restrooms, offices, elevators, and the bookshelves. When I go there, I feel someone is watching. I was in the basement one time to use the restroom. I stopped to see if any of the rolling carts had used books for sale, and to see if I wanted any. When I smelled tobacco, there's no smoking allowed. It was empty except for me, and the only light was the hallway, and the bathroom, of course. Then I heard a crackling radio station, and old-time music, like a band from the 1930s. The doors to the offices and classrooms were closed, and the windows in each were dark, there being no lights on. I went up the staircase to the main checkout desk, and told them I smelled smoke and heard music. Was there a movie being shown? Or an event taking place? Just then, the same crackling radio sound with faint 1930s music sounded. "There, do you hear that?" The librarian said she did, but there was no event. She said it happened from time to time. And the tobacco is from a pipe from the person who used to live there. She sounded very calm and matter-of-fact. "Thank you," I said. "I'm going now." It was a little awkward. I've had several other occasions of spirits making themselves known to me since I was younger, but those are stories for another day. I have always believed in ghosts, but it was solidified right after my dad died, very suddenly. My brother and I were young at the time. He was 4 and I was 9, so people got us toys as gifts when he passed, but we were still grieving, so we put them in my mum and dad's bedroom until we felt up for playing with them. The night after the funeral, a jack-in-the-box my brother got started jumping out of the box and playing music every hour on the dot. So when we went to get it and move it out the house, we found that it had moved from the closet shelf to the middle of the bedroom floor, right next to where we put our dad's belongings from the hospital. Keep in mind that my mother hadn't slept in that room since the day my dad died, because she couldn't bear the thought of laying in the bed without him. So we had no idea how or why it was moved, and why it went off every hour on the dot. As soon as we moved it out the house and just set it on our porch, it never did it again. I'd like to think it was my dad letting us know he's okay, and there with us, by scaring us, because he loved scaring us and making us laugh when he was alive. On a separate occasion, I also had my niece. She was 6 when these things happened, and she was born a little over 2 years after he died. He came and talked to her in her room. We brushed it off at first, but when she was talking about him, she named what he was wearing in the casket, and also knew his name, which we'd never told her before. Those 2 occasions really made a believer of me. In SoCal, there's a mission, San Juan Capistrano. I've seen a man, Caucasian, young, stubble beard, sandal shod, wearing a brown monk habit with this hood over his head. It wasn't crowded. It was a lovely autumn day. I've seen him several times. I also said hello to him, and he smiled with a lovely set of teeth. A hippie, I thought. He didn't answer, turned the corner, and then he was gone. His feet made no sound as he walked. I asked the clerk at the souvenir shop why he's always walking around here. There's a stool in the Catholic church. So is he a visitor like me, or does he work here, or does he come to service? She sort of blanched, saying there's people who ask, but he doesn't work or visit. It's weird. Oh, okay. So I'm not there for services or prayers, but went into the church. It was beautiful, with some painted scenes of early California people, as well as the usual Catholic statues of saints. I smelt a distinct musty smell, as well as the feeling of being watched. I said out loud, "It feels sad here. It's crowded. Many people in here?" Then I left. That evening I was in the kitchen alone, washing up some dishes and the counters. I am alone in the entire house. I heard a clatter of the crystal beverage coasters in the living area. Was it an earthquake? I went into the dining room and there was nothing there, but one coaster fell from the coffee table. I picked up all of them and brought them to a place on the counter. One of the coasters slowly rose from the counter and was suspended by itself. I look around, I'm alone. There's no wire or other way it can do this. I feel very scared, but instinctively know it's a spirit. I should not let it frighten me, because it feeds on emotions, and I said in a calm voice, very slowly, "Put that down." It does. Then I wonder, what next? I have to make it leave. I don't want a spirit in here. I've got to be polite. "Thank you. What else can you do? If you want to really impress me, do the rest of those dishes." Guess what happened next? Nothing. The other spirits I've encountered were one at a local library during a drum circle. I heard it singing like a Native American. No one else heard it. Another time it stole my thumb drive. I said out loud to please return it, that I really needed it, and it suddenly appeared. It stole other items from me, and I wasn't going to let it steal more. I asked the librarian about why my things were stolen, and this time it did return my thumb drive. She was nonplussed, and told me the basement had a ghost that sometimes does steal from patrons and employees, and that no one was allowed in the basement. There's another local library with a ghost. It used to be a very grand house when it was the residence of one of the famous families in the area. It was burned down, then rebuilt, to be almost the same as the original house. The house is now a library with several modern modifications like restrooms, offices, elevators, and the bookshelves. When I go there, I feel someone is watching. I was in the basement one time to use the restroom. I stopped to see if any of the rolling carts had used books for sale, and to see if I wanted any. When I smelled tobacco, there's no smoking allowed. It was empty except for me, and the only light was the hallway, and the bathroom, of course. Then I heard a crackling radio station, and old-time music, like a band from the 1930s. The doors to the offices and classrooms were closed, and the windows in each were dark, there being no lights on. I went up the staircase to the main checkout desk and told them I smelled smoke and heard music. Was there a movie being shown? Or an event taking place? Just then, the same crackling radio sound with faint 1930s music sounded. There, do you hear that? The librarian said she did, but there was no event. She said it happened from time to time. And the tobacco is from a pipe from the person who used to live there. She sounded very calm and matter-of-fact. Thank you, I said. I'm going now. It was a little awkward. I've had several other occasions of spirits making themselves known to me since I was younger, but those are stories for another day. I have always believed in ghosts, but it was solidified right after my dad died, very suddenly. My brother and I were young at the time. He was 4 and I was 9, so people got us toys as gifts when he passed, but we were still grieving, so we put them in my mum and dad's bedroom until we felt up for playing with them. The night after the funeral, a jack-in-the-box my brother got started jumping out of the box and playing music every hour on the dot. So when we went to get it and move it out the house, we found that it had moved from the closet shelf to the middle of the bedroom floor, right next to where we put our dad's belongings from the hospital. Keep in mind that my mother hadn't slept in that room since the day my dad died, because she couldn't bear the thought of laying in the bed without him. So we had no idea how or why it was moved, and why it went off every hour on the dot. As soon as we moved it out the house and just set it on our porch, it never did it again. I'd like to think it was my dad letting us know he's okay, and there with us, by scaring us, because he loved scaring us and making us laugh when he was alive. On a separate occasion, I also had my niece. She was 6 when these things happened, and she was born a little over 2 years after he died. He came and talked to her in her room. We brushed it off at first, but when she was talking about him, she named what he was wearing in the casket, and also knew his name, which we'd never told her before. Those 2 occasions really made a believer of me. Last night I was snapping some photos. I have a 3-second delay from the time I press the button until I see the flash. I have sold things online in the past, and when I got to these Halloween ghost earrings, I sold them. I was sitting on the sofa, and I had the item at arm's length against my background. When I pressed the button for the image capture, the second before the flash there was a woman's hand that waved at me. One quick left to right motion in front of my lens. I was stunned. It was darker in color, but I could tell it was a woman, and I could see the normal movement and impression of the bones in the hand. A normal yet ghostly appearing woman's hand. Very bizarre. Make it make sense. Nothing unusual showed up in the photo though. As a local water treatment specialist in rural central Pennsylvania, I have had some unique experiences while in some pretty creepy locations. Turns out water treating equipment is usually in the basement, along with those things that we often feared when we were little kids. Nearly 13 years ago, I was an apprentice to a soon-to-be retiring tech. The man was solid, noble, and not really someone you'd mess with. Our day's work schedule took us to Utah House. The softener needed repair, and of course the basement. We had our tools and headed down to a very obvious circa 17 to 1800 set of steps. Dark as night and musty. Already something felt ugly. I had a nauseous feeling overcome me and thought it just must have been the food we ate previously. My mental worked, with me looking over his shoulder, holding a flashlight, when from somewhere in the room a groan was uttered. I'm not kidding you, I wheeled around with that light fast to see what it could have been. The old tech spun around with me at the same time, and in the narrow light cone emitted by the flashlight, stood an old woman in complete Victorian attire, noble My mentor hightailed it up the rickety steps before I knew it, leaving me with the spectre. As soon as my foot hit the first step, I shined the light back towards where I had seen her. Of course, she was gone. The old mentor was waiting for me in the kitchen when I finally reached the top, and I must have looked as pale to him as he did to me. He fumbled his words, but managed to get, "Did you see that?" to come out. I think it was pretty obvious the answer, yes. We never mentioned it to the current owner of the inn, but later I read about the history of the place. I don't know who the old woman was, but in hindsight, and I mean true hindsight, as that's where she was to both of us when we climbed out of the basement, I don't think she meant us any harm. I'm not even sure she meant to scare us, now that I reflect on it. Kinda sad if she's caught there somehow. I had a weird experience once in a shower, in a home we didn't live in long as a child. I was taking a shower when suddenly I got a weird feeling of being watched. So I got out and put on a towel and started drying off, but I had a feeling of looking at the keyhole in the door. I looked, and there staring at me was an eyeball, but the strangest part was that the eye didn't appear to be on the other side of the keyhole at all. It appeared to be in it. I jumped up and got dressed quickly, told my mother, and she told me after talking to the last owner that they had a son who liked to watch people in the bathroom through the keyhole, especially his cousin or sister. This boy perished recently. It leaves me wondering. Me and my little sister were sitting in the living room having a conversation about some nostalgic memories we shared in our previous house. The room was silent when she and I both witnessed this foggy-looking figure walk across the room and could see the upper part of the body easier than the lower part. We both looked at each other in disbelief. I remember her mouth open in horror from it. I asked her if she just saw what I saw, and she nodded. It felt so surreal. I wonder what it could have been. In SoCal, there's a mission, San Juan Capistrano. I've seen a man, Caucasian, young, stubble beard, sandal shod, wearing a brown monk habit with this hood over his head. It wasn't crowded. It was a lovely autumn day. I've seen him several times. I also said hello to him, and he smiled with a lovely set of teeth. A hippie, I thought. He didn't answer, turned the corner, and then he was gone. His feet made no sound as he walked. I asked the clerk at the souvenir shop why he's always walking around here. There's a stool in the Catholic church. So is he a visitor like me, or does he work here, or does he come to service? She sort of blanched, saying there's people who ask, but he doesn't work or visit. It's weird. Oh, okay. So I'm not there for services or prayers, but went into the church. It was beautiful, with some painted scenes of early California people, as well as the usual Catholic statues of saints. I smelt a distinct musty smell, as well as the feeling of being watched. I said out loud, "It feels sad here. It's crowded. Many people in here?" Then I left. That evening I was in the kitchen alone, washing up some dishes and the counters. I am alone in the entire house. I heard a clatter of the crystal beverage coasters in the living area. Was it an earthquake? I went into the dining room and there was nothing there, but one coaster fell from the coffee table. I picked up all of them and brought them to a place on the counter. One of the coasters slowly rose from the counter and was suspended by itself. I look around, I'm alone. There's no wire or other way it can do this. I feel very scared, but instinctively know it's a spirit. I should not let it frighten me, because it feeds on emotions, and I said in a calm voice, very slowly, "Put that down." It does. Then I wonder, what next? I have to make it leave. I don't want a spirit in here. I've got to be polite. "Thank you. What else can you do?" If you want to really impress me, do the rest of those dishes. Guess what happened next? Nothing. The other spirits I've encountered were one at a local library during a drum circle. I heard it singing like a Native American. No one else heard it. Another time it stole my thumb drive. I said out loud to please return it, that I really needed it, and it suddenly appeared. It stole other items from me, and I wasn't going to let it steal more. I asked the librarian about why my things were stolen, and this time it did return my thumb drive. She was nonplussed, and told me the basement had a ghost that sometimes does steal from patrons and employees, and that no one was allowed in the basement. There's another local library with a ghost. It used to be a very grand house when it was the residence of one of the famous families in the area. It was burned down, then rebuilt, to be almost the same as the original house. The house is now a library with several modern modifications like restrooms, offices, elevators, and the bookshelves. When I go there, I feel someone is watching. I was in the basement one time to use the restroom. I stopped to see if any of the rolling carts had used books for sale, and to see if I wanted any. When I smelled tobacco, there's no smoking allowed. It was empty except for me, and the only light was the hallway, and the bathroom, of course. Then I heard a crackling radio station, and old-time music, like a band from the 1930s. The doors to the offices and classrooms were closed, and the windows in each were dark, there being no lights on. I went up the staircase to the main checkout desk and told them I smelled smoke and heard music. Was there a movie being shown? Or an event taking place? Just then, the same crackling radio sound with faint 1930s music sounded. There, do you hear that? The librarian said she did, but there was no event. She said it happened from time to time. And the tobacco is from a pipe from the person who used to live there. She sounded very calm and matter-of-fact. Thank you, I said. I'm going now. It was a little awkward. I've had several other occasions of spirits making themselves known to me since I was younger, but those are stories for another day. I have always believed in ghosts, but it was solidified right after my dad died, very suddenly. My brother and I were young at the time. He was 4 and I was 9, so people got us toys as gifts when he passed, but we were still grieving, so we put them in my mum and dad's bedroom until we felt up for playing with them. The night after the funeral, a jack-in-the-box my brother got started jumping out of the box and playing music every hour on the dot. So when we went to get it and move it out the house, we found that it had moved from the closet shelf to the middle of the bedroom floor, right next to where we put our dad's belongings from the hospital. Keep in mind that my mother hadn't slept in that room since the day my dad died, because she couldn't bear the thought of laying in the bed without him. So we had no idea how or why it was moved, and why it went off every hour on the dot. As soon as we moved it out the house and just set it on our porch, it never did it again. I'd like to think it was my dad letting us know he's okay, and there with us, by scaring us, because he loved scaring us and making us laugh when he was alive. On a separate occasion, I also had my niece. She was 6 when these things happened, and she was born a little over 2 years after he died. He came and talked to her in her room. We brushed it off at first, but when she was talking about him, she named what he was wearing in the casket, and also knew his name, which we'd never told her before. Those 2 occasions really made a believer of me. In my college, there is one haunted suite in one of the old dorms. It's completely blocked off, and the only way you can break in is through the suite next to it, which ironically was a designated party suite. A student ended their life in that suite nearly 30 years ago, but has never left the residence. Eventually, none of the other suite mates or anyone else could live in it, so the college blocked it off. My friend once sneaked into that suite with a bunch of other people. She said the whole place was empty as expected, except a single chair in the middle of the common room. That chair was said to be there so that the student spirit could sit and not bother people around it. Some people said it was the chair that the student used to take their life. My friend and the other people brought a Ouija board with them and used it to talk to the spirit, but they didn't get any concrete answers but could confirm through yes/no that they were indeed talking to the student's spirit. But before they could ask more questions, a door violently slammed itself in front of their faces, with there being absolutely no wind since the entire place was sealed off, and they'd checked every single room to make sure no one was there when they first came in. At that, they bolted. In high school, I taught at a small school for a few years. The building was pretty new and in good condition. My classroom was fine, no paranormal vibe at all, at first. A few months into the school year, I brought in 2 portraits of 2 politicians/activists to hang on the wall, a man and a woman. I taught social studies, and they were very relevant to my lessons. I hung them on 2 pieces of metal drilled into the wall using round hooks. One of them, the portrait of the woman, kept falling off the wall. I had the floor carpeted so that it wouldn't get damaged, but it was just annoying. My co-workers joked that there was a sexist ghost haunting my room. None of the windows in this entire building could be opened, so I couldn't blame it on the wind, and they fell when I was in the room with the doors closed. So literally I had no idea what could have caused it. One day I was not in the mood, and as soon as I heard the portrait fall one more time, I cursed the ghost out, saying it was disrespectful towards the female activist. I didn't actually believe there was a ghost haunting my room, I just yelled into the void from frustration. After that, the wall clock that had been fine suddenly began to fall down multiple times a week. One day, one of my co-workers, whose room was next to mine, pulled me into her room and told me this, that both our rooms were probably haunted. The person using the room before me was very uneasy and always found excuses to not be alone in the room. Before I came, her room was very haunted. One time, the hallway camera captured footage of the doorknob turning by itself, while absolutely no person was even near that wing. After I came, my room became the active one, with all the stuff falling off the wall. I was moved to a different room the year after, and never had an issue. Later I found out the school building used to be a dingy orphanage. Perhaps that might offer some insight into why the events occurred. April 27th, 2011. My sister was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. I was living 100 miles away, going about my day as normal, and was taking my son to get ice cream with his Boy Scout troop. Between one stoplight and the next, she appeared in my passenger seat. We both saw her and started talking with her. I drove to the corner where the bank was. The Dairy Queen was next door, but when I turned the corner, the shop wasn't there. It looked like an empty lot, so I drove in a circle trying to find the shop while still talking with my sister. We drove for around 2 hours looking for this Dairy Queen until we pulled up to the same corner again finally. Then suddenly she turned and said, "Thank you, I can go now." She then opened the door, exited, and disappeared. I turned the corner and there was the Dairy Queen. We pulled into the lot and I turned to my son and say, "We'll talk about this when we get home." We went inside, certain that everyone would have been gone at this point, but everyone was there waiting. They all ran up to us asking what was going on. The adults tell me they saw us circling and went outside to wave us down, but it was like we couldn't see them. The troop leader said we tried everything to get your attention, short of standing in front of the car, even threw a cup of water at the window, but it didn't touch the car. They asked me who the woman was in the passenger seat and perfectly described her down to a T. I didn't own a cell phone at the time, and didn't have a clue what was going on. We talked for an hour before heading home. Walking in the door, the phone was going crazy and the answering machine was full. My son runs out the door to play with friends before I can stop him, so I check the messages before answering the phone. Call your mother. Something happened. Go into the office and pick up the phone. It's my mother informing me my sister was gone. I argued, saying there's no way. She was just in my car 3 hours ago. My mother says, no hun, 3 hours ago she died. I went numb and hung up the phone. Walked outside and sat on steps in a daze, trying to process everything. I don't know how long I sat there until the sound of a car speeding down the streets drew my gaze. The car pulls into the driveway, barely stopping to put the parking in place. Out jumps my aunt, who ran around the car and walked down the stairs, and then envelops me in a massive hug. Only then do I start crying. I cannot remember a single thing that happened after that moment for 2 days. I saw her again at the viewing before the cremation. I hope she rests in peace. My gran used to work a second job as a barmaid in her youth. To get home after work, she'd have to drive through a few miles of country lanes, no streetlights, etc., just her car headlights. Out of nowhere, a cyclist appears, and she hits him. There's a loud bang, consistent with striking someone while driving. She stops the car and gets out, but there's no damage to the car and no one in sight. She tells me this when I was a kid, and I always assumed she was winding me up. But when I asked her again recently, she told me this is the truth, and that she always wondered what happened to the phantom cyclist. I used to work as a bartender on a military base, and one of the most memorable nights was Halloween. We had gone all out with decorations, including a skeleton perched on a barrel. Whenever someone passed by it, it would giggle and pretend to pour a bottle down its throat while spouting pirate sayings. One eerie night, as I was closing the bar all by myself, I switched off the decorations and locked the doors. Just when I thought everything was in order, a strange sensation made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Startled, I turned around, prompted by the sound of someone clearing their throat. That's when things took a bizarre turn. The skeleton suddenly sprang to life, as if someone had just walked past it. I was perplexed because I knew I had turned it off and there was no one else in the bar. I decided to investigate and found the switch in the off position, which left me baffled. Without giving it much thought, I removed the batteries and stashed them in my pocket. While counting down the till, an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over me. Finally, finished with my tasks, I was ready to go home. However, just as I approached the employee exit, I heard the pirate skeleton's eerie laughter once again, and without a second thought, I bolted back to my car. Back in the day, my family and I were living in this small, green town in Chile. The house they hooked up my dad with was the biggest and oldest in town. We signed a 5-year deal to basically babysit this place. My folks were stoked about it, especially since it coincided with my dad's retirement. It seemed like the perfect time to kick back in a peaceful countryside spot. The house had this crazy long corridor with windows all along it, held up by these old school pillars that supported the second floor. It might have been old, but it had character. One day my parents went out shopping, leaving my sister and me to fend for ourselves. Boredom started creeping in, so we decided to hang out in the front yard with Quinto, our dog, as we goofed around. Then I noticed Quinto kept stopping and staring at the house for a few seconds and getting back to playing with us. I tried to see what was up, but I couldn't spot anything weird. We kept at it for a bit, until I glanced back at the house and saw this ghostly white figure peeking at us from one of the hallway windows. It had a human-like shape, but lacked any discernible features or characteristics. It was a flat white silhouette, almost faintly luminous, and as fast as I saw it, It had hidden behind a pillar. I freaked out for a moment, but then convinced myself it was probably some reflection or whatever. Trying to play it cool, I looked at my sister, and she gave me this creepy look and asked, "Did you see that?" That sent shivers down my spine. We spent the rest of the afternoon outside, eagerly waiting for our parents' return. Over time, we did some digging and found out that back in the 1880s, a rich lady lived in the house. She had all kinds of illnesses. After her husband died, she hired a nurse who lived there until she passed away. It turned out our parents slept in the lady's room, while my sister and I crashed in the former nurse's quarters. Our contract only lasted 3 years, but man, those were some weird times. Despite more paranormal occurrences in the house, that was my first experience there, and my first one ever, and the only one where I actually saw something. The other times were just strong sensations of being watched. Every person who came to that house, even visitors, felt the same way. Even the dogs would be on high alert and bark at empty spaces. Thankfully, nothing as terrifying as that ever happened. Thank God. We moved to a duplex house that had been vacant since the owner died. We don't know if she died there or not. At first, my partner and I would notice the kitchen lights going on or off while we were in the living room. Then, the light panel covering the bulb would come off and bounce noisily in the kitchen. This happened several times. My partner nailed it back on, so that would be the end of that. I'd be napping, and I'd hear footsteps with hard soles and the garage door opening. I realized my partner only wore soft-soled shoes. I was sitting in the living room and I could see down the hallway, and I saw a mist or cloud of smoke drifting from the spare bedroom to the master bedroom. I was napping in my bed and felt someone sit next to me, and the mattress went down. Later on, my daughter felt this and so did my partner. The stronger vibes began during Thanksgiving. I have these 2 old lamps that were at my grandparents' house. They are beautiful, but I don't turn them on because of the old wiring, but they were plugged in. During Thanksgiving, I saw my daughter looking in the mirror, and the one lamp near her was turned on. Then on my birthday, which was a week after Thanksgiving, my partner and I are in bed asleep at 3 a.m. The other lamp light comes on. We sat up and looked around, both of us annoyed, and he got out of bed and turned it off. He gets back into bed, and we start to sleep, but the light switches on about 2 minutes later. This time he gets out of bed and removes the light bulb. Regarding the previous lamp that turned on when my daughter was there, I called her and asked her if she switched it on. She said no, that it just came on, and she thought it was set up through a system to turn on. We no longer live at that residence. This was around 12 years ago. I was riding my bike to work up 4th Avenue in New York City, turning up 4th Avenue from 10th Street. I was going towards Union Square to go to my retail job on the Upper East Side. I was late and riding my bike pretty hurriedly and probably looked frantic and stressed. Then as soon as I turned up 4th Avenue, this tall black man wearing white pant jumpsuit and a white heart-shaped sunglasses on a fully white bicycle pulled up right next to me on my bike and said, "Hey, why are you stressed out? God woke you up this morning, you have both your arms, both your legs, and your health. What are you upset about? Today's going to be a great day." And then he rode off in front of me and vanished like vapor. I felt comforted, and it definitely snapped me out of my morning stress funk. I have encountered many odd people talking to me around New York City, but this felt different. It felt like a ghost or an angel, almost like a vision, but also 3D. It lasted total maybe 30 seconds, and I just wonder, has anyone else seen him? My family is from Brazil, and there are a lot of spiritual, superstitious beliefs there. My own workplace experience was when I worked in a bar in an old part of Toronto. The land of this whole neighborhood was originally used as a base when the British Army was in war against the USA. So the bar had an office in the basement. To get to the basement, you had to go down a creaky, steep stairwell. As you can imagine, it was incredibly creepy. Only the owner had a key to the office, and even when he wasn't there, you could see the light of the office through the bottom door slat and a shadow walking back and forth in the room. One night I was closing the bar with a co-worker, and we could hear moving and bumping in the basement. We knew we were the only ones there because we cleared the basement before closing. So the sound got more frequent and we decided to get out of there. And as we're walking back to the door to lock up, we hear someone running up the basement stairs. My colleague pushes me out the door and locks it behind me, and we get the hell out of there. Anyone who had to work overnight at that place always reported the feeling of someone watching them. I grew up in an area that used to be Potawatomi Sioux and French fur trading village. This history is relevant. Outside of town, just down the road from my grandma's house, was a clearing in the woods on top of a hill, right near a spring. When I was a kid, my dad chose to situate a single-story ranch-style prefab home in that clearing, and we moved into it when I was maybe 12 or 13. The weirdness started right away. Within a few days of moving in, when we were all watching a movie in the living room, we heard a loud bang like a gunshot in the kitchen. When we went to see if something had fallen over though, nothing was out of place. Then came the silhouettes that would walk behind us in our reflections, always in the kitchen windows. After that came the footsteps on the roof, always after midnight, pacing slowly from one end of the house to the other, like someone keeping watch. I think I was the only person who ever heard these, since everyone else was usually asleep by then. Sometimes I would go out to the back porch to see if anyone else was up there, but of course they never were. Finally, it all came to a head when I was 16. It was late, and I was shutting everything down for the night, turning off all the lights room by room as I headed to my bedroom. I stopped in the kitchen just long enough to get a cup of water, then turned off that light. At this point, only the hallway light and my bedroom light were on. I was taking a drink as I headed into the dining room, and when I lowered the cup I saw a person standing in front of me, and I stopped. It was another girl who looked about my age. She had long blonde hair that was wild and messy, like she'd just rolled out of bed and come running, and she was wearing this dingy white Civil War era nightgown, and she had blue eyes that were wide open in sheer terror. I don't know if she was looking at me or at someone who had once been standing in that exact same spot, but she clearly saw someone or something that had terrified her. Then I blinked, and she was gone. Some years later, after I'd half forgotten about the incident, I was reading up on my hometown's history. I'd already known about the Potawatomi village, former site of a Potawatomi Indian village that had been on the town's billboard for longer than I can remember. But I hadn't known about the French traders, nor had I known that after the Civil War, indigenous peoples and French folk alike were rounded up and forcibly relocated by the US Army, so that the land could be seized by the government and redistributed to the soldiers as payment for their service during the war. And I thought about our convenient little clearing in the woods, and the footsteps on the roof in the middle of the night, and the shadows, and the gunshot, and the girl, and I couldn't help but wonder. My parents divorced when I was incredibly young, around 2 years old. Eventually, I moved out west to be with my father and brother. I flew back to Ohio every summer to visit my mum. As a somewhat moody teenager, I used to love visiting old cemeteries. I especially loved this one in Cleveland. President McKinley is buried there. Side note, his mausoleum is incredible. So during one of these visits in 1994, I brought my mum and little half-brother who was a toddler at the time. We were just driving around, checking out all the cool headstones. It was a nice summer day, so the windows were rolled down. My little brother was in the back seat, when all of a sudden he began giggling. At first, I just assumed he was being a silly little toddler and didn't pay it much mind. Then, the giggling got more intense, and I looked back at him, and he was trying to stick his arm at the window pointing at something. My mum asked him what he was looking at, and he said, "Look at the people dancing." I was so creeped out. To this day, the three of us look back at this and laugh. He doesn't really remember it since he was so young, but my mother and I certainly do. The second story happened much later, around 2011. My wife at the time, and I, had moved back to the city we had met, and where her parents were living. We had just spent the last 6 years living in San Francisco, and had 2 small children. We were renting a house in the suburban Phoenix area. The first few months were fine, nothing notable. Around 3 to 4 afterwards, some seriously creepy stuff started happening. First, my daughter, who was 3 at the time, came running into our room, screaming about how the Wolfman was at her window trying to come inside. I didn't really pay it much mind, knowing how little kids can have overactive imaginations. But then, my ex-wife and I started noticing things too. We'd hear noises coming from the air ducts, almost like biblical choir singing. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man wearing a fedora hat standing in front of my closet in my room. She said she saw something similar too. But here's where it gets even weirder. Her mother, a super conservative evangelical, told us she had a golfing friend who was super hippy-dippy and could do readings of our house. So I contacted this lady over email and asked if she could do it for us. She explained the process, which involved us drawing a map of our house and giving it to my then mother-in-law. But she insisted that I not tell her where I had seen or heard anything, just that I gave her the map. I created a rough sketch and handed it to my mother-in-law. So to reiterate, this lady had no idea where we had experienced anything, and she refused to take any money from this. She just wanted to try and help. My mother-in-law swore she didn't tell this lady any specifics, and she's not a person who lies. Very goody two-shoes. Fast forward a week or 2 later, I get an email from her with the results. She said she saw a presence in my room by the closet door. She said he may have been dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and he was effectively my guardian angel. She didn't use that term, but something similar. Basically, he was there to specifically protect me, and that he was not doing anything malevolent at all. Shortly after, I stopped detecting this presence. During this time, I was going through some personal problems that I was going to great lengths to hide from everyone. At one point, I don't remember if it was just before or after the reading, I was entering the house after work and saw what I can only describe as something that looked like a fleet of angels fly into the house from the sky. Very vague and ethereal looking. It's not like they were in physical form. I tend to give that less weight than the reading, but who knows. I deleted that email from her because it freaked me out so much, and now I wish I'd kept it. For the record, I'm agnostic/atheist, depending on which day of the week you ask. This happened to us in the summer, County Durham, northeast England. My boyfriend and I stayed at a pub hotel in the early summer back when we were long distancing, and my boyfriend was still living in Liverpool. He would regularly come up to see me, and we'd stay in different hotels in my area of England because I lived with my family. In this pub, in the room we were staying in, We had a little bit of an argument, but before it could escalate, I decided to go outside and sit in my car for a few minutes. So I left the hotel and sat in my car, which was in the car park, at 9 p.m. When I returned to the room about 5 minutes later, my boyfriend told me that we were in trouble with the manager for being noisy. He told me that after he returned to the room, the manager had knocked on the room door and told him off for making noise, saying he had received 2 complaints about the noise we had been making. Before we checked out the next morning, I was looking out of our room window and saw a young couple also leaving, and wondered if it had been them who'd we'd annoyed and who had complained. We went out for breakfast, and things about the complaint did not add up to me. For one thing, we were not that loud, and hadn't been laughing even that long before I went out to my car. So how did 2 people manage to complain, and for that complaint to go straight to the manager all in the space of 5 minutes? It took me that time to walk to my car and back. I concluded to my boyfriend that the manager must have just heard us himself and made up the fact that 2 guests had complained. Fast forward to the afternoon of that day, and we check out, and we unexpectedly needed to book another night at this pub/hotel due to the trains being on strike, where my boyfriend was due to travel back home. While I was at work, my boyfriend went back to the pub and checked us in for another night. He apologized for being noisy the night before to the woman who was checking him in. The woman said she hadn't known about us having made a noise, and my boyfriend told her that the manager had knocked on our door last night and told him off. The woman member of staff said that it was odd because the only staff they had on at night was the chef and the young male bartender, and neither of them went upstairs, and that their manager was a woman with blonde hair, not a man. The female member of staff said she doesn't know who this man was, none of the staff do, but that other guests have also told her the same, that a man had knocked on their door complaining about the noise, implying he was the manager. Well, the man my boyfriend had spoken to was in his 60s, with gelled back, salt and pepper hair, and he was really mean. My boyfriend called to me later and said that when he apologized, this man just glared at him and didn't make a move to leave, so my boyfriend just awkwardly shut the door on him. My boyfriend asked who else had stayed there, but that it was just us and the other young couple I saw leaving. This left us questioning who on earth the man was that was knocking on our door pretending to be the manager. So that night we were feeling quite creeped out. We were in a different room that was just opposite the one we previously stayed in. Eventually we forgot about it and were having a bit of a laugh again when a really hard knock on our door rang out. My heart sank and I was telling my boyfriend not to answer it because it was the man again. He of course answered anyway. The door was about 2 to 3 feet from the bed we were on. He opened the door and there wasn't anyone there or in the corridor, which we were at the end of. It was a long, straight, creaky corridor. We were all terrified by now. The next day, my boyfriend emailed the pub explaining the situation and saying we were concerned a weird stranger was knocking on the doors in the hotel. We gave him the exact times of both incidents and asked them to check their CCTV cameras, one of which was right next to both of the rooms we'd stayed in. The manageress replied to his email with this: "Dear Mr. Dawson, following your recent complaint about another guest knocking at your door late at night, we reviewed our CCTV footage at the time stated. At exactly 9:05 p.m, the CCTV footage showed a man knocking and having a brief conversation with the guest in the room, after which the man turned left and walked down the corridor. However, he was not picked up on any CCTV footage leaving the premises or walking further down the corridor. Following this, we have gone over security points of the building and made sure all entrances are secured to prevent anything like this from happening again. However, the next day we did not pick up anything unusual happening on our cameras at the stated time. We hope these incidents didn't affect your stay at our pub, and we apologize profusely for any stress this may have caused. Just know we have taken all measures to try and resolve this." This email to us made us feel validated that we didn't imagine our experience, especially to have it confirmed by the manager herself via CCTV. We did ask to see it ourselves, but our further emails were ignored. The pub was taken over by a pub chain company soon after, and they're very strict with their staff being anti-ghost stories and only focusing on quality customer service. According to a former staff member who I by chance managed to speak to, the member of staff told me some crazy things about the pub. I guess you can imagine what they might have been. I had a couple of experiences as a kid that I chalked up to imagination, but the one that made me a believer was when my aunt passed. My brothers and I were doing homework in our dining room. My dad was watching TV on his recliner, and we thought our tenant was in the shower. The bathroom right next to the dining room. Our mum was gardening in the backyard, and she suddenly zooms past us and goes upstairs. Dad comes to us chuckling, saying she must have had to go really bad, as we had a second bathroom upstairs. Suddenly the shower gets turned off, and a few moments later our mum exits the bathroom. She had been showering, as the tenant walks through the front door. So my dad runs upstairs because obviously someone broke in, but there's no one in the second bathroom, and the 2 rooms upstairs are empty. The tenant's room's empty, but 4 people had seen this person clear as day run upstairs. We were weirded out because whoever we saw looked really similar to my mum. Later that night, we got the call our aunt had passed. It happened just before we saw the person rush upstairs. She was the spitting image of my mum, only about a decade older because she was the eldest of 9, my mum the youngest. We think maybe she stopped to say goodbye. When I was 18 years old, I woke up one night and saw a man and a young girl standing at the foot of my bed. He was mouthing something, but no sound was coming forth. I thought it was a dream, but it would happen a few times a week for a few months. It looked like the man was trying to tell me, sorry. I figured it wouldn't hurt me, and finally I told him I forgave him. He smiled and walked away. Years later I was talking with my older sister, and we approached the subject of ghosts, and I told her the story. She went white, as the color drained from her face. When I asked her what was wrong, she informed me that my mum had told her about seeing the same thing. We figured that it was a friend of my brother who had died from a motorcycle accident. The strange part was that about 6 months before he left another friend's house and didn't see their young daughter behind his vehicle and ran her over. Her injuries were severe and she passed away. I know the guilt he felt, so we figured that he wanted our forgiveness and was letting us know he was watching over the little girl. I can still see this as if it just happened. It's something that I will never forget. I don't believe I've experienced a ghost, but definitely something paranormal and malicious. So let me take you back to when I was 6, and my parents and I lived in a motel room. One night I awoke from the couch to something whispering my dad's name over and over, and it getting louder. It wasn't one voice, but multiple, all distinctly saying his name. Derek, Derek. I turned to look, and saw above my dad a strange mist of dark colors. The shape was shifting. I was terrified. The next day I told my mum about it, and she waved it off as a nightmare. Years later though, when I was having a conversation with my mum, she told me that she had lied to me. She waved it off as a nightmare to scare me, and confirmed that on that same night, she had heard the voices too. When I was little, I was at this house of one of my mum's friends from church. I was playing in one of the upstairs bedrooms. This room was sort of creepy because it had a little door that opened up into an attic space. The attic space was narrow and went back a ways. It had exposed studs and insulation and was used for storage. I remember hearing something move around in the attic space, so I opened the little door, but it was very dark and I didn't see anything in there and closed it. As soon as the door shut, I heard loud scratching sounds from behind the door, and it gave me the chills. So once again I opened the door, and was immediately shocked because there was now a light on in there, a light bulb that hung from the ceiling with a pull chain to turn it on or off. The light bulb was swinging back and forth. I felt panic, and I turned around to leave when I saw something that froze me in my tracks. In the bedroom was the shadow of a very tall, skinny man standing a foot from me on the wall next to the attic door. The silhouette looked like he was wearing a full-length robe. It went almost down to the feet. On his head was what looked like a fez. The shadow walked across the walls, around the room, and went out the door, never to be seen again. I've always been obsessed with the paranormal. I loved reading ghost stories, listening to paranormal experiences from other people around the world. Anything I could get my hands on that was even remotely related to ghosts, I was hooked. While I've never seen a shadow figure or heard a voice, there have always been small things happening in my house that I can't really explain. Maybe my door opening on its own, or just feeling someone in the room with me, that sort of stuff. However, this story, and just the way it connects, truly gives me an uneasy feeling to this day. You see, when my aunt was pregnant with my younger cousin, they were living in a different house than they are now. My older cousin was laying down with my aunt in her bedroom, TV off, magazine in hand, nothing abnormal. When out of the blue, my cousin looks up into the doorway of my aunt's room and says that she sees a man. My aunt is confused because she doesn't see anyone. If you're super into paranormal stuff like I am, you know that younger or more innocent people are more likely to see things that the less innocent are able to. Of course, my aunt was confused, and my cousin was insisting there was a man in the doorway of the room. My aunt asked my cousin to explain what the man looked like, and she said the man was tall, wearing a suit and had a hat, specifically a fedora. I wasn't born when this happened, so this is a story that's been circulating around my family for a while. Fast forward 20 years or so. I was in middle school, and I'm home alone with my dad. I lived in the same house my whole life, so the creepy experiences I've had in my house have become familiar and they don't scare me anymore. However, this one night truly got me nervous, and it was really out the blue. I'm sitting in the TV room while my dad is in the kitchen waiting for food to be delivered to the house, and I got up from the TV room and walked into the kitchen. My dad was sitting down looking out the kitchen window, and I assumed he was watching the cars as they went by our street. An important part of this story is the door that leads into my kitchen. We have a set of small steps that are in our driveway. They lead up to a glass door that sits in front of a heavy door on the inside of our house. The glass doors were closed, but the wooden one was open, giving anyone sitting at the kitchen table a full view into our driveway. I closed the wooden door because it was cold, and the glass door was so old it didn't shut properly and would let in a draft. Immediately after I shut the door, my dad told me to open it. I was confused since the food wasn't there, and it's not like we were expecting anyone. I asked him why, and he said in a very normal tone that there was a man there. I told him that there wasn't anyone standing there and he was freaking me out. He insisted he saw me a man standing at the glass door looking into the house. He then goes on to tell me that when I closed the door he was gone. We live in a main road, so anyone passing by could have easily come up to the door. However, with the layout of our house in comparison to how our driveway is, it's simply impossible for there to be a person on our steps 1 minute and not the next. I was freaked out at this point, and my dad was a prankster and doesn't believe in ghosts, but hearing something like this come from him was out of line. He then points out exactly how tall the man was, and even what he looked like. He said he had darker skin, grey hair, and was wearing a suit and hat. Shortly after, he told me about this, and I texted my mum because I was so afraid. My dad came into the TV room to eat dinner with me. I asked him if he was really being serious about the whole thing, and he said he was. I believe my cousin and my dad saw the same ghost 20 years apart, and it really creeps me out. The one thing about this story that I can't ask my dad about, now that he passed away, is I've done some research, and apparently the ghost who wears a hat could be a sign of childhood trauma. but to my knowledge my older cousin and dad haven't experienced any sort of significant trauma like that. I wonder. In my lifetime, I have encountered and seen a lot of paranormal things. It makes me wonder whether or not it's something I possess, or perhaps a case of me being in the right place at the right time. This encounter happened when I was a child. I was around 10 years old when all of this began. When I was around 3, we had moved to a different state in an old Victorian house. The house was built about the 1990s. When I was around the age of 10, I began to notice a tall, dark figure around the house. I made small comments to my parents, but they ignored it. The figure would visit me almost every night, and I had no idea who he was or why he was there. This figure was darker than a pitch-black room. I could see the vague resemblance of a top hat and some sort of coat. I would usually have dreams about him sitting at the end of my bed and trying to reach out to me or play with my hair. After these dreams, I would awaken to him standing in my doorway. He never did anything to hurt me, but he's always made sure I was aware of him. I would often get afraid and call for my mum. She would bring me into her bed and I would sleep there for the night. One particular memory of him always sticks in my head. One night, while I was sleeping in my parents' bed after being frightened by him, I heard a bang. It was loud enough to wake me up, not loud enough to wake my mother up, but I opened my eyes and looked around the room to find where it came from. I had noticed my father was gone from the bed, and I assumed he left for work. I then saw the man descend the stairs to the first floor. I rolled over and woke up my mother and asked where my dad had left. She said he had left about an hour ago, so this definitely wasn't him. I continued to see the man reach out and try and do random things in the house to get my attention. Around the age of 13 is when I moved out the house. I continued to see him until the day I left. To this day I still think about him and wonder who he was or what he was. Seeing as though he didn't follow me to the next house, I assume he was trapped there. This is just another one of my experiences, and if you don't wish to believe, that's fine. Even though I was a little kid, I know without a doubt, he was real. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I used to stay at my friend's house in Alabang, here in the Philippines, since I'm currently working in a different city from my place. The first time I stayed there, I was always getting headaches, and it felt like the energy in the house was heavy. I didn't mind it at first, but things got worse the more I stayed. I always slept on the bed with my friend. Then it always felt like someone was watching me. I always shrugged off that feeling at first, then kept on seeing a woman with long hair and a white dress watching me sleep. I always wake up at 3 a.m, and it scares the crap out of me. I ignored it at first, but one time I woke up and she was beside the bed, standing, and when I checked her face, her head was crooked and she was looking at me. I immediately shook my friend to wake her up, but she wasn't there anymore. I kept on seeing her and even had a nightmare about her, and I eventually got used to it. I asked my friend since I kept on getting headaches when I walked in the hall beside the stairs, and that is when she shared the story of the house. The last owner of the house took her own life on the second floor via rope, and I got chills after hearing those stories. I even told her to get rid of the doll facing the stairs that leads to the room. Since I got used to her, I always just try and ignore her when she's there. Then one time, I was preparing coffee at 3 a.m, and if I didn't walk on the hallway beside the stairs to go to the kitchen, I had to go around the dining area with a big mirror on it, like the mirror that you have in a dance studio. I'm done with my coffee, so I decided to go back to our room. When I was walking back to our room, I was looking outside, and I saw a black figure beside the pool with yellow, glowing eyes. We were staring at each other for 15 seconds because I wanted to make sure that what I was seeing was real, and I was frozen on what I saw. I walked and acted normal when I went back to the room, and decided to wake up my friend. I was shaking. I will always try and avoid that house, if possible, in future. Most people are probably aware of the story of Ed Gain. For those who aren't, he was a small-town handyman who confessed to murdering 2 women, in addition to stealing numerous bodies from their graves. One of the women he murdered was the owner of the local hardware, where he shot and killed her. That building still stands today. My story happened over 20 years ago. I live in that same town, and it was just before Thanksgiving. I had already started decorating my place for Christmas, and I needed to replace some of the lights, so I made a quick trip to the hardware store for a few boxes. I knew the building was rumored to be haunted by the murdered woman, but I never put much stock in it. I was in the back area where they kept the Christmas decorations and was about to grab the lights when I heard someone nearby saying something about antifreeze. I turned my head and saw a woman walking by with a massive gunshot wound in her head. She then suddenly vanished. I stood there in shock for a good minute when I finally made my way to the front of the store to pay for the lights. The guy behind the counter took one look at my face and simply said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I worked in a county jail. One night, between 3:30 a.m. and 4, I was called to come to a cell block to relieve the officer for a short time. He had a phone call in the office or something. When I get to the cell block, he says thanks, and he should be back before it's time to do a check and leaves. So all the cells in this unit are faced the desk, and has a small window so the inmates could look out. I sat at the desk and twiddled my thumbs for a few minutes when I heard a tapping coming from one of the cells. I look around trying to see where the tapping was coming from, and I hear it again. Then I hear a voice say, 17 house. I look over at cell 17 in the corner and see an inmate standing in the window tapping his wrist asking what time it is. I held up the amount of fingers and he nodded before stepping back into the darkness. A few more minutes went by and the officer still had not come back. I looked at his log and realized he was due for a check. I stood up and began looking around the cell block, looking through the cell door windows to make sure all the inmates were safe and nothing was out of the ordinary. When I got to cell 17, the one where the inmate who asked me the time was, I shined my light into the cell and it was empty. Like completely empty. No inmate, no bedding or personal effects, nothing. I double-checked that it was cell 17 and finished my check. When I got back to the desk, I pulled up the cell log that showed which inmates were in cell 17. It was empty. I sat back at the desk and looked over again to make sure that it was cell 17 that asked me and not cell 18 or 16. Cell 17 was in the corner, and I was 100% certain that was it. When the officer got back, I told him what happened. He thought it was odd, as cell 17 had been out of service for about 2 weeks due to having a broken toilet. When I left the cell block, I went to the sergeant's office to ask him to pull video of the incident, as I knew there was a camera that faced cell 17. Video showed me sitting at the desk. You can hear the tapping and the voice say, 17 house, and me holding up my fingers to show the time. But no face appeared in the window. On another occasion, I was working in the maximum security unit on the night shift. It was pretty boring with nothing to really do except checks where you go around and look in each cell every half hour or so to make sure everything was okay and the inmates weren't doing anything they weren't supposed to. It had been around 15 minutes or so since my last check, and I was sitting in the control room reading a book to pass the time. The control room sits higher than floor level and looks out over the cell block. If a person of average height were to walk right by you, you'd only see the top of their head. As I'm reading my book, I see out of my peripheral vision the top of a bald head walk past the window. I knew that nobody else was in the area, as another officer would have had to go through 2 sets of remotely open doors, and there was no way past my control room. I looked up and into the cell block. I didn't see anyone. I then looked at the camera monitors, which showed every angle of the cell block. Still nothing. I put my book down and exited the control room, making sure to lock the door behind me in case an inmate got out of their cell. They couldn't lock me out of the control room. It's uncommon but possible. I walked into the cell block, shining my flashlight into some more dimly lit areas. I took notice that I did not hear a cell door close, so if an inmate did get out of the cell, they would have to have either closed the cell door incredibly quietly or they were hiding somewhere. I radioed for another officer to respond to my location as backup. I began to conduct a check, making sure to count the inmates in each cell and pull on the door to make sure it was locked. When I reached the upper tier, one of the inmates was standing at the cell window and asked me what time it was. When I told him, he noted that I was early on my check and that I'd been checking the doors. The guys have nothing to do but watch you. The inmate asked if I saw the bald-headed guy. He must have seen the expression on my face, because he said that he was seen by someone at least once a night, usually passing quickly by the cell windows. He said they always knew it was him, because there were no bald officers on night shift. I went back to the control room and locked it behind me. I asked the officer who responded as my backup about the bald-headed guy. He was a very senior officer and said that he'd never personally seen him, but it wasn't uncommon for officers to report it. I never saw the bald-headed guy again. Eventually, I was promoted, and every once in a while an officer or inmate will ask me about him. Back in 2001, I was in Dublin, Ireland, on a trip. I was there with my now ex-fiancée, and it was during some outbreak, I think either hoof and mouth or mad cow. Anyway, tourism suffered badly, and places like Ireland ended up getting not that many tourists, but it was great for us. A lot of the places we went to had excellent service, and they were very glad to have us. And many places were quite empty. Well, one morning shortly after breakfast, we decided to go to Christchurch Cathedral. We do the tour of the church and just generally walk around. I had a camcorder back then, since cell phone cameras weren't a viable option. I used to love it. I think I paid over $600 for it. So we're touring the church, and I'm mostly using the camcorder inside it, but I do take some overall shots inside too, down the pews and stuff. There's a footbridge from Christchurch to Dublin, so I take some photos there. Something in that footwalk made me feel really uncomfortable. My ex also said she was feeling sick and asked to leave. So we get on with the rest of the tour of Dublin, then go home. We get home, and a few days after arriving, some friends come over, and I start to play my camcorder recordings of shots from Dublin, Dublin Castle, Trinity College, Guinness, Christchurch, Temple Bar, and some shots of our trip to Wicklow. When the part of inside Christchurch comes up, one of my friends asks, "Who's that crying?" I didn't hear it, and my ex jumps up and is like, "Holy crap." We rewind the tape and put the volume up on max. We can hear someone crying like a moaning type cry. The thing is, it's following us around most of the video. The next day we took my 35mm film to get developed, and in 4 photos you can see smoke swirling around one wall and another hanging overhead. Then the photos of the footpath between Christchurch and Dublin. There are flames on the corner of the wall. 11 years have passed, and I'm married and happen to take a trip to Europe. We have a few days back in Dublin, and I tell my wife about my prior experience in Christchurch. We go inside, do the tour, and the funny thing is I didn't get deja vu, but everything seemed really different. Like I remember a little walking path behind the church, nearest to the Liffey that was not there. The inside layout is all different like the pews. Well, it was about a decade later, so I shook it off. We take some cell phone pictures and videos and get back to the hotel. And I don't see anything, but then my wife is like, "Who's the guy behind me?" "Another visitor," I say. She said no one was around us when we took the pics. The guy had his head turned, not looking at us, but was really close to my wife. She said if someone had been that close she would have noticed. I don't know what to think about that place. Maybe someday I'll go back to check it out again. I'm convinced my workplace is haunted. I had my first encounter while at work one evening. It was a little late, and a co-worker and I were staying behind to clean up after the others had left for the day, which is something we do frequently. I was going about my business and cleaning up, but when we were done and heading back to the sluice, My co-worker and BFF noticed I had a pretty large oil stain in the shape of a handprint on my upper back. At first, I was suspicious about my co-worker, thinking that she had placed her hand on my back, but we later compared her hand to the hand on my back, and her hand was too small. Thinking back on it, I never felt anyone put their hand on my back while I was working. That, and the stain was visible. If someone had actually put their hand on my back, they would have needed to keep it there for a while, and while I was moving about. I find it pretty freaky. I still have no clue where it came from nor how it got there. My second and most recent encounter happened 2 days ago. The weather was pretty bad, and the power ended up going out, halting production. The foreman and assistant foreman told us to go wait inside the sluice, but it got a bit crowded, and we eventually shuffled into the cafeteria. My best friend and I were made to go clean up as usual, but since it was almost pitch dark, we couldn't see anything, and only finished off with the machines the best we could. When we got back to the sluice, we both saw someone standing by the racks, where we usually hang our work clothes, but when we got around the corner and out from behind one of the shoe racks, there was no one there. We looked into the foreman's office that was attached to the stairwell, and we looked into the other sluice that's right beside the one we use, but no one was there. The weirdest part is that we both saw two different ghosts. I saw a short and stubby one, while my best friend saw a tall and lanky one. By far, the weirdest experience I've ever had. But I did have another. When I was visiting my best friend and we were watching The Conjuring, she had turned on some candles for subtle ambience. While we were watching the movie, one of the candles she lit almost went out while the other one was standing perfectly still. What I find scary is that the candle only moved whenever something happened on screen. The candle was on a shelf, mind you, so I got creeped out and I eventually just blew the candle out. Something I should note is that my best friend has an attachment, her word not mine, and now I'm pretty sure something has latched onto me as well. Her house has some spooky stuff in it, and I'm no authority on this particular subject, but nevertheless it's kind of scary to me, although she assured me the ghosts that reside in her abode aren't harmful, but they like to mess around. I'm not so sure myself. This is my grandfather's story. Around 15 years ago, my grandfather was working in South Africa as a film distributor. He would drive around providing films to theaters and screening places in all parts of the country, including remote ones. On one such journey, he was driving in the middle of nowhere when he saw a light coming from a farmhouse. Since it was very late and dark, he decided to head to the house to see if the owner would let him stay the night. Upon arriving at the house, a woman in a long white nightgown asked if he would like to stay the night. Turns out the farmhouse was some kind of B&B. My grandfather said yes, so she let him inside. Lining the walls were photos of Boers. I like to think of Boers as Dutch cowboys in South Africa from the Second Boer War. The woman jotted down his name in a book, like a hotel sign-in I guess, and told him, "I'll put you in the blue room." Okay, my grandfather thought. Weirdly specific, but he didn't give it much thought. Entering the room, my grandfather found that it was quite large, had a 4-poster bed against one wall, and a fireplace directly across from it on the opposite wall. Cozy. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, my grandfather woke up from a noise. He sat up, and suddenly at the foot of the bed he saw what looked like a Boer soldier impaling a British soldier with his bayonet before disappearing. Needless to say, he was shaken up by this and did not sleep well the rest of the night. The next morning he went downstairs and ran into the woman, who asked him, "How did you sleep?" My grandfather replied, "I slept well until 2 in the morning. Something strange happened." "Ah, you saw it too, didn't you?" My grandfather stared at her, and she said, "I knew you were British, so I decided to give you that room." My grandfather left shortly afterwards and never went back. 50 years later, he still sometimes questions what he experienced that night and whether it actually happened. But if there was one thing that still convinces him, is that the South African woman said, "You saw it too." I don't believe in ghosts. If I see someone I don't know and trust, like on TV telling a ghost story, I struggle to believe them. That being said, I had an experience when I was around 10 that I'm going to share. It must have happened in 2003. My friend and I were walking to football training. I live in a quiet countryside town in Scotland. To get to the football training, we would walk past the tennis courts, and it saved a lot of time. The tennis courts are located at the bottom of a wide, open, grassy area. Next to the tennis courts is a sloped section of ground that runs the length of the court. I think it's meant to be the stand where people can sit or stand and watch. It's sort of like a grassy pyramid that's been stretched out in length. There's a part that leads down to the stand and just stops. On the far side of the stand is a small wooded area. We were on the path walking towards the tennis courts. It was broad daylight, no one is around. The wooded area briefly falls out of view as the path is on a slight decline. We walk up the hill of the stand onto the main body of it, and there is a woman standing at the trees. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, looking directly at us. My friend and I are walking towards her. She is standing between a fence and a small stream that's guarded by a waist-high fence. We walk the length of the court, now less than 10 meters from her. She hasn't moved. She just continued to stand and stare. We turn at the bottom of the court, now with our backs to her. We haven't said a word, but we looked at each other and ran. The woman was grey in appearance, but wasn't transparent or anything. She looked like a real person. She was in some sort of uniform, washed out looking, clothes included. It's quite hard to describe. She didn't move once, and I don't mean she just stood still. She didn't move at all. She was three-dimensional, but it was like she was a cutout that had been placed there. My first thought wasn't, oh my god, it's a ghost. Only afterwards did we realize what might have happened. There is nowhere this woman could have come from. There are 2-meter fences blocking everywhere apart from the far side entrance to the tennis courts and the approach we used to get there. The far side entrance line of sight is never broken. The stand only obscures part of the wooded section for a moment. She simply was not there. We broke line of sight for maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and there she was. The village I live in is small, and I'd never seen this person before, nor have I seen her since. For a good 10 years, that area would terrify me at night. I would hug the fence until I had to turn my back to the area we saw her at which point I'd run. Doesn't matter how muddy the grass was, it was genuinely too frightening to care about the condition of my shoes. I don't know how to explain this. I tell people I don't believe in ghosts if they ask, but I always offer this story as consolation. Looking back on it, I wish I'd spent more time looking at her as it was happening, despite not realizing what I was potentially looking at. The unbroken eye contact was unsettling. It made it difficult to look at her. That friend I don't speak to anymore. We haven't for around 15 years, but I bumped into him in town about 4 years ago. The first question I asked once greetings were over with was, "Do you remember we saw that ghost?" His reply, "I do, mate. Aye." That's confirmation enough for me. Years ago, I had the following experience. My boyfriend and I at the time had watched a film, and he said I'll take it back to the rental place, which was down the road from my house. It was late afternoon, and my parents were home. While he was returning the rental film, I waited on the porch, and was looking at the house across the road, where a boy had lived who died in a car accident a month before. The boy had been around 14 when he died. I was looking into the house and thinking about him when I saw a figure appear slowly in front of the window of the house. I could see a figure wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and I could see a head but no facial features, just a pink kind of mottled face. Then the figure began to vibrate side to side, which was fairly frightening to see. I was of course shocked and scared. I turned back into the house and my mum said, "What's the matter?" I told her I saw something strange and told my boyfriend also. I don't think they believed me, but I know I saw it. I feel amazed and honoured to have witnessed it. I've only told 5 people this as I felt awkward and people would think I was strange. This must have been around 28 years ago now, but I still remember it clear as day. During the height of COVID in 2021, I had to take a plane somewhere for work. Beforehand, I had to self-isolate in a hotel for 2 weeks. During that 2-week period, I was on a Discord video chat with my wife every day, and nothing really happened for the most part. One night we were talking and watching stuff together. She wouldn't go take a shower, but left the camera on. As I'm sitting there chilling on my phone, not looking at the camera, but I still had my headset on, I heard a little girl's voice come through my headset. I forgot specifically what it said, but I do remember her giggling, so I turned to the computer and thought, oh, she's just playing a prank. Very funny, babe. But there was no reply. I then heard the voice singing the classic scary movie trope Daisy Daisy song, but towards the end of it, the little girl voice became 2 voices overlapping each other, like a man and a girl at the same time, and it became distorted. As this was all happening, I see the green glow around the border pop up to show the audio is coming from my wife's microphone. I keep trying to say, "Ha, you're very funny there." The thing with the talking then stops, and I say, "Hello?" trying to get her to reply. But then the little girl's voice replies instead, "Hello?" At this point, I'm freaking out. I asked another question but forgot what it was. After that, the girl just said, "Look behind you," and laughed. At this point, I'm nearly wetting myself. I did one of those scary movie reactions where I turn around super fast and nothing was there. Now my wife came back from the shower, and I see her come out of the only hallway we have in our small apartment, so there's no way she was at the computer. No way she used a soundbar, which I don't even think she'd heard of before. I didn't end up telling her what happened until I got back. Otherwise, she'd have been scared out of her mind by herself. To this day, I get chills thinking about it. I tried searching online to see if people have had their Discords hacked or something, and that makes hackers talk through their mics, but found nothing. If anyone has any input or an explanation, I'd love to hear it. Back in my rebellious teenage days, I was volunteered to babysit for my 4-year-old cousin. This was punishment for getting speeding tickets. This would also be the first and last time I ever babysat someone. Since my aunt had to wake up and head to work at 6 a.m, she let me stay the night. I woke up to my little cousin, Jocelyn, tugging my arm. I knew right away she would want cereal and cartoons, so I led her into the living room and put on her favorite show. She also began the interrogation of questions: what I was doing there, how did I get there, what was going on. I explained to her that I had stayed the night, a concept that blew her little mind. She couldn't believe it. I had woken up at a house that wasn't mine. Cute, right? It would soon turn into me calling my mum to pick me up. As I'm in the kitchen making her cereal, I hear her begin to whisper, okay. I know we're only us two in the house. She's got to be singing her show or something. She begins to laugh hysterically like someone just said the funniest thing she's ever heard. I then realize her show isn't even on, it's a commercial. I'm freaked out. She's talking back and forth now, and I know that she isn't talking to herself because she's kind of taking pauses. She then says the phrase, "So you stayed the night too?" I dropped the bowl. I called my mum to tell her to come get me now. I still have no idea who or what she was talking with, but it freaks me out just thinking about it. I worked in a restaurant built in the 70s, but the foundation was from the 20s or 30s. I'd hear strange things at night. I'd be in the cooler, and it would sound like someone was yelling my name. I'd walk up front, and always nothing. I'd be there by myself finishing paperwork and swear I heard someone pounding on the front door, so I'd check it out and nothing. I always thought it was the ice maker, but this happened once while it was busted, or the wind, but the door didn't move at all when it was locked. One day after thinking my name was called, I walked up front, and one of the kids that had been there the longest goes, "You heard your name called, didn't you?" He goes on to tell me that a broom was pulled out of their hands on the side of the room. All of this is just creepy more than anything, but one night I'm doing the paperwork and one of the guys is with me, and the security camera starts flickering. And suddenly, in one room, the little icon that says whether there is movement or no movement so it knows to record, shows a stick figure running, and it changes from color to black and white. It had never done that before. We didn't leave the office and waited to see if anything showed up. Nothing did, and we just slipped through that room as quickly as possible when we left. I tried to pull the footage the next day, but it didn't end up recording anything after 10:30 until the first guy came in the next day. I have always believed in the paranormal and had dreams when a relative dies, but a few months ago, I was sick and had one of those dreams. I was watching YouTube and my dogs randomly started barking for 10 minutes. I happened to be home alone. When I went upstairs, one of them was hiding and the other was staring and growling at a random spot on the wall. It stopped after a few minutes but then started again. The third time it happened, I heard someone running upstairs, so I went up there, and after checking almost every room, I went to the second floor, not counting the basement. I got a really bad feeling when I walked past my stepdad's room. Because of it, I ignored that room, but after checking every other place in my house to make sure no one was hiding, I entered his room. When I opened the door, I saw a shadowy, misty figure standing there. The figure then turned and walked into my stepdad's wardrobe, where he vanished. A shadow person was in my mum's house. Before I'd move out, I'd regularly see things in the corner of my eye. 2 occasions made me a true believer. Once I was watching TV late at night, and I thought I could see a shadow from the corner of my eye in the corner of the living room. I thought nothing of it, but then our dog, who was asleep, abruptly wakes, fur rises up, teeth bared, and begins growling. He goes to the corner of the room and begins barking uncontrollably. On another occasion, I saw the same shadow person. I was in the kitchen making food. I was home alone again with the dog, and as I turned towards the fridge, I saw clear as day a shadow walking up the stairs. The dog runs to the bottom of the stairs sniffing the air, and then again starts barking, and would not leave my side and refused to go upstairs ever again after that. And when I say never again, he never went up the stairs. Ever. My mum passed away before Christmas. I was visiting Dad and we heard my mum cough. She had COPD and was always coughing. I went upstairs and her TV was on the bedroom and it was freezing cold. I called out to her and said, "I love you, Mum." I hope she heard me. We miss her dearly. I've been a believer as far back as I can remember, because my family were mostly all believers. I grew up to listening to their stories of the encounters in Mexico. My first experience was when I was around 5 years old and seeing a woman approach my bed at night reaching for my face. For years I told myself it must have just been a very vivid dream, but who knows, I was 5 years old after all. My latest experience was just a few years ago now. I was living in a house my husband and I had rented for a few years. We had just had our baby, and I got up around 5 in the morning to check on him since he was crying. After I was able to get him back to sleep, I walked back to our bed from his crib in the same room, and was just closing my eyes when I felt the bed sink next to me, as if someone was climbing in bed with me. At first I thought it was my daughter. She was in her early teens, and she still likes to snuggle with her mum. I opened my eyes expecting to see her, but saw no one. I closed my eyes and immediately just said, "No thank you." I didn't know what else to say, and I felt whatever it was get up and leave. I actually felt the bed move as it normally does when someone gets up. I would try to convince myself and say that it was just a vivid dream, but I was too awake for this to be a dream, and feeling the bed move was too much to discount. There were other instances in that house that were all experiences that led us to believe there was something going on, even for my husband, who's a firm skeptic. He heard footsteps, and my daughter one time while home alone heard someone shush her from inside of the house while she FaceTimed with a friend. We have a hard time explaining those away. My first paranormal experience that I remember was when I was 4. My grandma, who I never knew or saw pictures of, came into my room and sat at the foot of my bed. We were actually conversing back and forth. My grandma had died a year before I was born. I told my mum what happened, and of course she didn't believe me at first, until I started describing what grandma looked like. That made her believe. I had a friend I made in Indonesia while I worked in Jakarta. I was chatting to her one night via Yahoo Messenger with the video on. This was back in 2010, a few months before I met my wife. I'd been chatting to her for some time, and at some point I noticed a girl behind her on the floor. She was just chilling and smiling with her legs bent in front of her. I was really amused because my friend had been chatting to me for some time, and it turns out she's been ignoring her friend the whole time too. So I teased her and said, "Hey, a head just popped up behind you," expecting her to say, "Oh, that's my friend and such, and she's just hanging out." Instead, she says, "What head? I'm alone." And I say, "That girl, there's a girl with glasses behind you." She looks totally freaked out. I joked that she had a ghost, but I didn't mean it. It just looked like an ordinary young woman, and it kinda looks like the woman's ducked down and is gone. I asked my friend to get up so I can see her room and it's empty, and she says she's totally alone. My friend looks really frightened, and I try to calm her down and say I might have been imagining things, but I only say it to calm her down because she looked so terrified. It was late, but at the time I regularly went to bed late and felt pretty awake because text chatting always makes me a bit nervous for some reason. Then she says that 3 of her other friends told her they can see a girl in her house, but she's never seen the girl herself. They all described her as wearing glasses, except everyone says she's wearing different clothes. One says it's a red dress, another a dark blue shirt, and for me she was wearing a white sort of blouse and pants. Her glasses were big and square and looked to be in her late teens or early 20s. She tells me she basically didn't take her other friends seriously, as Indonesians can be quite superstitious. And my friend was not into any of that stuff, didn't believe in ghosts or have any real religious beliefs. I didn't believe in ghosts either, and if she hadn't have looked so freaked out and told me about her friend, I may have put it down to a hallucination. The other thing was that the video was still quite small, but the picture was very clear and was neither glitchy nor blocky. It would be weird if my imagination overlaid a hallucination so perfectly to appear partially obscured by my friend's desk on the floor behind her. The funny part of the story is that we both thought the other person was lying. I thought she was lying about there being no one in the room, and she thought I was lying about seeing someone. Nevertheless, the fact I saw this girl independently of her other friends intrigued my friend, and she asked me questions about her. Although I only saw her briefly, I still remembered what she looked like. The next time I chatted with my friend on a different day, and we spoke about it again. Apparently she asked more questions to her other friends, and she had a friend that claimed to be a psychic that supposedly communicated with ghosts, and allegedly said that the ghost liked it because in the house, that was where she was kidnapped and murdered, in an area that used to be farmland, as she lives just outside of Jakarta in a place called Depok. I don't know if I believed any of that. I only know what I saw, and I saw what just appeared to be an ordinary young woman, totally solid, no transparent or anything. I went back to Jakarta as part of a Southeast Asian holiday with my wife and met up with my friend. I asked her again if she was playing a joke on me, but she claimed she wasn't, and we chatted about it again. If she's playing a prank on me, one, she's an amazing actor, as she looked really scared when I said there was a girl in her room, or she improvised the story about her friend seeing the girl really quickly, although it wasn't really her style of humor. It made me more open to the idea of ghosts being scientifically trained. I still have my mind that it might have been a joke or a trick of some kind. It just strikes me as very genuine, even after rereading the transcript of the chat. It's a shame I couldn't save the video, and even if I could have at the time, I didn't think I was seeing anything unusual. I have always believed in ghosts, but it was solidified right after my dad died, very suddenly. My brother and I were young at the time. He was 4 and I was 9, so people got us toys as gifts when he passed, but we were still grieving, so we put them in my mum and dad's bedroom until we felt up for playing with them. The night after the funeral, a jack-in-the-box my brother got started jumping out of the box and playing music every hour on the dot. So when we went to get it and move it out the house, we found that it had moved from the closet shelf to the middle of the bedroom floor, right next to where we put our dad's belongings from the hospital. Keep in mind that my mother hadn't slept in that room since the day my dad died, because she couldn't bear the thought of laying in the bed without him. So we had no idea how or why it was moved, and why it went off every hour on the dot. As soon as we moved it out the house and just set it on our porch, it never did it again. I'd like to think it was my dad letting us know he's okay, and there with us, by scaring us, because he loved scaring us and making us laugh when he was alive. On a separate occasion, I also had my niece. She was 6 when these things happened, and she was born a little over 2 years after he died. He came and talked to her in her room. We brushed it off at first, but when she was talking about him, she named what he was wearing in the casket, and also knew his name, which we'd never told her before. Those 2 occasions really made a believer of me. I used to be a skeptic. I don't believe in the supernatural, in God or anything like that, although it sounds cliché. Since I've been living in the colonial city of Querétaro, I've started to doubt, seriously. It all began when we went to explore the back of a friend's house who owns a restaurant in the center of the city. There, all the houses are old, and this house was no exception. My friend, 2 other friends, and I were there. Suddenly, my friend and one of the friends stayed at the threshold of one of the doors. I asked them what was wrong, and both claimed there were ghosts there. I scoffed them, telling them they were crazy, and continued on. I didn't see or feel anything. Both insisted that they felt something, I guess because they're sensitive to the paranormal, which I learned recently. Every time I wanted to go to that place for dinner, my friend refused. She said there was a very negative energy there. I went back many times and nothing happened. The only thing I could witness with my own eyes was during a New Year's Eve party we had there. 3 of my friends were surprised by something. I saw how a strand of one of their curly hairs inexplicably remained horizontal. I didn't think anything of it. In fact, I found it funny. They just laughed nervously. And that was the only thing that happened that day. Now that I remember, it was surprising, but I stayed in denial. Sometime later, when I had the chance, I asked the owners of the house if they'd also seen or felt anything strange. They replied that they hadn't personally. The only incident was when they were renovating the bottom floor of the house and they unearthed a tombstone that was over 100 years old. They also told me many customers and employees of their restaurant had made comments about something lurking in that part of the house. The only concrete story came from the kitchen assistant, who told me he had seen a little girl and he was really scared to the point of quitting the job. A few years passed, and I like to visit downtown craft beer bars at night. I chatted with a bartender at the bar while talking about craft beer most of the time. One time, the topic came up, and he told me that near closing time around 2:30 a.m., he saw a man leaning against the wall next to one of the refrigerators at the entrance. He was just standing there as if he were drunk, but he wasn't a real person. He said that the apparition didn't speak or do anything, was just there. I didn't believe him. 6 years after moving to this city, my friend accompanied me to another craft beer place, also located in the downtown area of the city. We had an event, and after it ended, she sat alone at one of the tables while I went to greet and chat with the other attendees and friends. Suddenly, she called me and asked to please leave. She was very insistent. I asked her why, and she replied that she felt a ghost, and that it had actually pushed her. and moved the bench. I reluctantly agreed, not without telling her she was overreacting. Some time passed, and I went back to that bar. Sometimes I chatted with the owner, and sometimes with the waiter. Once I asked the waiter if there were any ghost stories there, and he said there were. I let him tell me whatever he wanted without specific questions. He didn't give me many details, but said that it used to be an old-style tavern, a cantina in Spanish, and in the back room, when my friend said she was pushed, there was a ghost of a woman, most likely a sex worker. She probably was there because she'd been killed there. It was that day and that moment where I started to believe people who claim to see or feel ghosts. Now I genuinely fear that I might perceive them someday. A few months ago, I went on a trip with 2 friends. Both of them are very sensitive to the supernatural. One can only sense or perceive it, while the other has told me about seeing full apparitions with all their detail. We arrived at a hotel in the late afternoon, a hotel that was just over 30 years old, beautiful, with hundreds of guests that day. We took the elevator and realized that our room was located quite far away and had to walk down the hallway and make 2 left turns just to reach it. As we began to walk down the hallway, still decorated with a somewhat old carpet, one of my friends said, "The good thing is that this hotel isn't haunted." All 3 of us laughed and continued on to the room. The next morning, we headed to breakfast and ran into the housekeeper in the hallway. We greeted her with good morning, and one of my friends asked her, "There are no ghosts here, right?" The housekeeper just stared at us with a nervous laughter. "Or are there?" She laughed and quickly told us that there are. She told us that on the upper floor there's a ghost of a night guard who died of a heart attack. Several people have seen him making his rounds on that floor, of course only at night. Then she told us about the maid who died in room 45, the one that's practically in front of the 2 elevators. People say she frequently knocks on the door of that room at different times, like when they knock to see if the guest wants their room cleaned. "Thank you," we say, and we hurried off to have breakfast. We went up to the elevator and one of my friends said, "I said there were no ghosts," but it was only to deny that I had felt something. The next evening, we returned from our city activities, quite tired, but I still wanted to spend some time in the hotel lobby. We walked down the long hallway to the elevators, and when we arrived, I pressed the down button. Shortly after, the bell rang to signal the elevator had arrived, and the left-hand elevator door opened. The elevator was empty, and the light was off. I'd never felt anything like this, and it scared me, so I hesitated to get in. The friend who was with me said, "Oh, that's really strange." The elevator door closed its door, and we heard it go up a floor then down again. I was waiting for the other elevator to arrive, but it didn't. Instead, the left elevator returned and opened its door again, but this time the light was on. I truly felt goosebumps, something that had never happened to me in such a situation, and more so because I don't believe in ghosts. How frightful. Could it be the maid from the room in front of room 45 playing a prank on us? We waited for the elevator to leave, and for the right-hand elevator to arrive so that we could go down without fear. I really felt something strange had occurred. How could the lights in the elevator go off? There was a small switch located next to the floor buttons, and then, when it went up and down, who turned the light on if it was empty? The ghost night guard? We returned to our room after spending some time in the lobby and shaking off the spook, and we told our other friend, the one who sees ghosts, what happened to us. Oh yes, it was definitely the ghost of the maid. She never used the elevators or went near the elevator again. In the last few days we were there, she used the stairs on the side of our room, even though we were several floors up. When I was 15, the movie Paranormal Activity came out. My friend and I decided to try the Ouija board. We spoke to this guy named Frank, and I remember he used to say messed up things like, "My mum is standing behind you, and she doesn't like you. I'll overdose on pills." Just weird and crazy dark stuff. But my friend and I both thought we were messing with each other to try and freak each other out. A few weeks later, I was sleeping in bed. I had a shelf above my headboard that my grand teddy from primary school was sitting on. The teddy had been there for years without being moved, and there was a dresser with a mirror at the end of my bed. I woke up to the teddy falling on top of my head, and when I would wake up looking directly into my mirror, and there I saw a girl brushing her hair in front of my dresser. I rubbed my eyes numerously, and instead of her disappearing, she became more clear. But the more I stared, it was like I was looking at myself when I was even younger, as she had thick auburn hair, but was wearing a very old-style nightgown. Soon I realized it wasn't, and I hid under the covers, and after checking numerous times to see if she was gone, she finally disappeared. Fully freaked me out. We stopped doing the Ouija board and did other normal teenage stuff. I never told anyone about what I saw at the bar, but a few friends put it down that I was seeing things and I was still dreaming. Fast forward 11 years, I'm 26 now. I picked up my sister and was driving her home, and she randomly started talking about when my friend and I played with the board. And she's like, "Josie, my other sister and I swear you brought something into the house." And I shrug and I'm like, "Why do you think that?" And she replies by saying that she used to wake up seeing a girl brushing her hair in front of her. I slammed the brakes and was like, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, just brushing her hair." I confessed that I saw her too and always thought I was dreaming. Anyway, we both haven't seen her for many years, which I think is lucky because I don't want anything in the house. But I do admit, it does freak me out, and I really don't want to see her again. My mum used to work the night shift at a hospital before she retired. Years ago, she had a terrifying experience that she recently told me about. During one of her shifts, she held an elderly patient that was in the ICU getting ready to pass. Oftentimes, my mum would sit and visit with her patients during her downtime. The woman was crying, so my mum held her hand and asked her what was wrong. While still crying, the woman said that he was here for her. She said that he was evil when he was alive, and he's just as evil now. Confused, my mum asked if the lady was talking about her husband. The woman told my mother her dead husband made her life a living hell, and now, on her deathbed, he'd been in her room for days tormenting her. He told her he was here to take her. She said he had been standing in the corner of the room since she was admitted to the ICU. My mother offered to pray with the woman, which she accepted. The woman eventually passed, but had told my mother before she went she no longer saw her husband and was able to go in peace. When I was little, maybe 7 or 8, I had my first paranormal experience. My mum always told me that she felt like I was attracted to things from the spiritual realm, even as a baby. But this experience is the first one that is my own memory, and I remember it vividly that I'm now 26 years old. My mum was unlucky enough to have not only my father die, but also my little sister's father. My father passed away due to a car accident, and my sister's dad tragically took his life after a severe battle with depression. Needless to say, my mum had it pretty rough and has been a single working mother. She would often take us to a family friend's who's babysat us while she worked late nights at the hospital. The woman who babysat us was warm, kind and gentle, called Rhonda. She always took the best care of us and my sister, and I really enjoyed staying with her. Rhonda had 2 birds who we loved to talk to, and they would repeat simple things like "hello" and "what's up." We thought it was the coolest thing. After a long day of playing, my sister and I were off to bed, and Rhonda tucked me into bed in her spare room downstairs. My sister was still pretty little, and she slept in the same room as Rhonda because she was too scared to sleep alone, and Rhonda was like a grandma to us, who was more than happy to share her bed if we got scared. I was a big girl, and I loved having my own room to sleep in, and I was never scared. On this night though, I was having trouble falling asleep, and just kept tossing and turning, growling frustrated that I wasn't asleep, and for some reason I began to get anxious and became fearful. I don't know why I was scared, but I was. And after what felt like forever of me lying there, contemplating getting up and crawling into Rhonda's bed, I heard something in a low, calm, male voice say, "Marissa, it's okay. Just go to sleep." This surprised me, but didn't scare me. I believe that as a child, you're more open and susceptible to paranormal things due to the fact that you're not conditioned to be fearful yet. With age, you learn what's scary, and all things that go bump in the night that you should run away from. But I was still so innocent that I didn't register this as threatening. Actually, this calmed me down, and I started to feel very tired, and just accepted what the voice told me, and went to sleep. The next morning, Rhonda made us breakfast as she always did. She sat across from me and sipped her coffee that I always asked to sip for because if I wasn't already a strange child, I also had a taste for coffee. She asked me how I slept, and I told her that I was really scared and that someone told me to go to sleep. She looked at me confused and asked me if I had a dream that someone was talking to me, and I told her no, I was awake. She said it was probably the birds talking again, and I told her that I was sure it was not. She then asked me if it was a man or woman's voice, and when I instantly said it was a man's, her face changed from the usual cheery, warm expression to put off and uncomfortable. I had never seen her face look like that before, and I think that's why I remembered this so vividly. She changed the subject quickly, and we went about our day, and I didn't think about that again for years. Fast forward into my teens, my mum and I were having a discussion about the paranormal, because I had a lot of strange activity happening, and she asked me what the first experience I remember was. I shared the story about the man's voice at Rhonda's house, and how odd Rhonda's reaction was, and my mum looked at me, and her eyes widened a bit. Now, Rhonda went a little MIA a few years later, and unfortunately she just slowly lost contact with us, and eventually was no longer a part of our lives. I hadn't seen her in years. When my mum collected her thoughts, she looked at me and said, "Marissa, you know Rhonda's son died in that room, right?" I did not. I knew she had a son who passed away from a tragic overdose, that I didn't think about it. I looked back at my mum, and we didn't have to say anything. We were both thinking the same thing. If I was hearing a spirit speak to me, there's a good chance it could have been from her son. From what my mum said to me about him, he was a very kind and caring person, much like his mum. Maybe that's why I wasn't afraid when he spoke to me. I'm not saying that this is factually what happened, but it does make me wonder. The voice I heard was real, that much I do know, regardless of who it belonged to. It's sure to me that that much is true. Since that experience, I've had many, many more, and unfortunately they've gotten more sinister as I've gotten older. I've got very, very dark for a while, and witnessed things that you would probably only see in horror movies. But I still think of this experience often, and hope you enjoyed listening to my testimony. I had a weird experience once in a shower, in a home we didn't live in long as a child. I was taking a shower when suddenly I got a weird feeling of being watched. So I got out and put on a towel and started drying off, but I had a feeling of looking at the keyhole in the door. I looked, and there staring at me was an eyeball. But the strangest part was that the eye didn't appear to be on the other side of the keyhole at all. It appeared to be in it. I jumped up and got dressed quickly, told my mother, and she told me after talking to the last owner that they had a son who liked to watch people in the bathroom through the keyhole, especially his cousin or sister. This boy perished recently. It leaves me wondering. Me and my little sister were sitting in the living room having a conversation about some nostalgic memories we shared in our previous house. The room was silent when she and I both witnessed this foggy-looking figure walk across the room and could see the upper part of the body easier than the lower part. We both looked at each other in disbelief. I remember her mouth open in horror from it. I asked her if she just saw what I saw, and she nodded. It felt so surreal. I wonder what it could have been. In SoCal, there's a mission, San Juan Capistrano. I've seen a man, Caucasian, young, stubble beard, sandal shod, wearing a brown monk habit with this hood over his head. It wasn't crowded. It was a lovely autumn day. I've seen him several times. I also said hello to him, and he smiled with a lovely set of teeth. A hippie, I thought. He didn't answer, turned the corner, and then he was gone. His feet made no sound as he walked. I asked the clerk at the souvenir shop why he's always walking around here. There's a stool in the Catholic church. So is he a visitor like me, or does he work here, or does he come to service? She sort of blanched, saying there's people who ask, but he doesn't work or visit. It's weird. Oh, okay. So I'm not there for services or prayers, but went into the church. It was beautiful, with some painted scenes of early California people, as well as the usual Catholic statues of saints. I smelt a distinct musty smell, as well as the feeling of being watched. I said out loud, "It feels sad here. It's crowded. Many people in here?" Then I left. That evening I was in the kitchen alone, washing up some dishes and the counters. I am alone in the entire house. I heard a clatter of the crystal beverage coasters in the living area. Was it an earthquake? I went into the dining room and there was nothing there, but one coaster fell from the coffee table. I picked up all of them and brought them to a place on the counter. One of the coasters slowly rose from the counter and was suspended by itself. I look around, I'm alone. There's no wire or other way it can do this. I feel very scared, but instinctively know it's a spirit. I should not let it frighten me, because it feeds on emotions, and I said in a calm voice, very slowly, "Put that down." It does. Then I wonder, what next? I have to make it leave. I don't want a spirit in here. I've got to be polite. "Thank you. What else can you do? If you want to really impress me, do the rest of those dishes." Guess what happened next? Nothing. The other spirits I've encountered were one at a local library during a drum circle. I heard it singing like a Native American. No one else heard it. Another time it stole my thumb drive. I said out loud to please return it, that I really needed it, and it suddenly appeared. It stole other items from me, and I wasn't going to let it steal more. I asked the librarian about why my things were stolen, and this time it did return my thumb drive. She was nonplussed, and told me the basement had a ghost that sometimes does steal from patrons and employees, and that no one was allowed in the basement. There's another local library with a ghost. It used to be a very grand house when it was the residence of one of the famous families in the area. It was burned down, then rebuilt, to be almost the same as the original house. The house is now a library with several modern modifications like restrooms, offices, elevators, and the bookshelves. When I go there, I feel someone is watching. I was in the basement one time to use the restroom. I stopped to see if any of the rolling carts had used books for sale, and to see if I wanted any. When I smelled tobacco, there's no smoking allowed. It was empty except for me, and the only light was the hallway and the bathroom, of course. Then I heard a crackling radio station and old-time music, like a band from the 1930s. The doors to the offices and classrooms were closed, and the windows in each were dark, there being no lights on. I went up the staircase to the main checkout desk and told them I smelled smoke and heard music. Was there a movie being shown? Or an event taking place? Just then, the same crackling radio sound with faint 1930s music sounded. "There, do you hear that?" The librarian said she did, but there was no event. She said it happened from time to time. And the tobacco is from a pipe from the person who used to live there. She sounded very calm and matter-of-fact. "Thank you," I said. "I'm going now." It was a little awkward. I've had several other occasions of spirits making themselves known to me since I was younger, but those are stories for another day. I have always believed in ghosts, but it was solidified right after my dad died, very suddenly. My brother and I were young at the time. He was 4 and I was 9, so people got us toys as gifts when he passed, but we were still grieving, so we put them in my mum and dad's bedroom until we felt up for playing with them. The night after the funeral, a jack-in-the-box my brother got started jumping out of the box and playing music every hour on the dot. So when we went to get it and move it out the house, we found that it had moved from the closet shelf to the middle of the bedroom floor, right next to where we put our dad's belongings from the hospital. Keep in mind that my mother hadn't slept in that room since the day my dad died, because she couldn't bear the thought of laying in the bed without him. So we had no idea how or why it was moved, and why it went off every hour on the dot. As soon as we moved it out the house and just set it on our porch, it never did it again. I'd like to think it was my dad letting us know he's okay, and there with us, by scaring us, because he loved scaring us and making us laugh when he was alive. On a separate occasion, I also had my niece. She was 6 when these things happened, and she was born a little over 2 years after he died. He came and talked to her in her room. We brushed it off at first, but when she was talking about him, she named what he was wearing in the casket, and also knew his name, which we'd never told her before. Those 2 occasions really made a believer of me. I wouldn't say our house is haunted, but we do get visitors, and I'm very sensitive to the other side. I always know when there's a presence near me. My ears perk, the hairs of the back of my neck stand on end, and my back will tense up. I have a few stories to share. When we first moved in, we had a ghost dog in the house. One time I was getting ready for work, and I heard what I thought was my dog's nails walking behind me on the linoleum bathroom floor, followed by feeling a cold, wet nose touch the back of my leg. I turned around, fully expecting to see my dog behind me. But nothing. No one was behind me. I walked out the bathroom, my dog nowhere in sight. She was all the way in the other room laying on her bed. Another time our dog was in the bathroom with me, and she started growling at the closed bedroom door. Seconds later, I hear the sound of what I can only describe as the sound of a dog scratching itself and making its collar jingle. We only had one dog, and she was right in front of me, staring in the direction where the noise was coming from. Every now and then, I feel a presence down the hallway and in our other bathroom. I always get the feeling of an old man. He's never done anything to scare me, but I definitely feel him. Although a few months ago, my husband and a girlfriend of mine were in our living room, and all of a sudden the sink in the bathroom turned on full blast. That freaked me out, because we were the only ones in the house. When I was a kid, I would always feel as if something was right behind me. I'd run up and down the stairs more often than walk, because I'd feel scared. One night I woke up, My room was pitch black, yet in the middle of the room stood a tall silhouette of what I thought was a man. I reached over to the light next to my bed, and it immediately got unplugged. I just hid under the covers till morning. Some other time I woke up and felt like I was being tickled. One time involved a dream. The dream was a vision of Jesus on a cross followed by a loud flash and a bang. This repeated a total of 5 times. Then I woke up, feeling pain in my side, as if someone just punched me. I was 13 and scared crapless. Later on I learned that my brother would also feel watched, and he learned to just tell it to piss off. My dad told us someone had died in the attic before we moved in, and that happened to be my bedroom. My mother bought a house in Coolidge, Arizona. Her house wasn't very far from the Casa Grande ruins, which is 1,000 years old and reportedly extremely haunted. I moved in with her during the pandemic, and I only stayed there 8 months before I had to leave, because it was so undeniably infested with spirits. My first experience was with both my mum and dad. We were all 3 in the kitchen, cooking for our annual Christmas Eve party, and all of a sudden this extra large painting that my mum had hanging up on the wall got lifted up off the hooks, clear as day right in front of the 3 of us, and launched straight at us. It spooked us, but we didn't really know what to think, so my dad just put it back up, and sure as hell 10 minutes later it happened again. I've also experienced seeing a full figure apparition in the garage. It was late, and I was the only one awake. I went to the garage to grab a beer, and out of the fridge, as soon as I turned the light on, there was a huge Native American man standing there staring at me. He looked like a chief or something because he was fully dressed to the nines with the big feather headpiece and everything, and looked like the real deal, and a real person, not see-through at all. Whenever it was loud, like we were playing music or goofing around, everyone would hear a man scream, "Shut up," super loud from down the hallway, but no one would ever be there. The experience that I had that finally made me leave was when I was dead asleep one night laying on my stomach, when out of nowhere, I felt the pressure of 2 hands grabbing me firmly by the ankles and yanking me with great force to the foot of my bed. When I turned and looked, no one was there, but I got the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room and that someone was very angry with me. I've had beings pass through my home from time to time, but they don't usually stay for long. One used to like to hang out in my bedroom closet for some strange reason, and I found myself constantly yelling at it to get out. Eventually though, when I stopped paying attention to it, it finally left. There was another one that liked to interfere with my prayers, but I suspect that one may have been a demon. I have a linen closet in my room, and one night while I was praying, the doors to this cabinet just propped open and a few towels fell off the shelves. The strange thing about this cabinet is that it's old and has the door sticks, so it would have needed force to actually open. You have to press in on one side in order to be able to pull on the other side of the door. You can't just gently nudge or tap on them. It was weird, and made me so angry that I yelled at whatever it was to get out too. That one left in a hurry. We have multiple ghosts in our house. One lives in the attic and only gets noisy if we feel like we disrespected his space. We'll hear him stomp down the attic stairs, through the house, and then back up the stairs in the middle of the night when this happens. We also have 2 in our basement. One is an old man who just messes with the lights and opens and closes the washer and dryer mostly. And the second is actually my first cat that passed away 16 years ago in our laundry room. She had a super distinct tortoiseshell coat, and I often see her walking between my legs to the washer and dryer when I'm putting in or switching loads. I also have a personal attachment to Daniel, who is a 4-year-old boy. He's been attached to me since I was around 8. When my family moved into a farmhouse that was built in the early 1800s, Daniel's parents had built the house, and tragically passed away when he got into the maid's quarters and drank lead paint, and then fell down the narrow maid steps. When we moved into the house, he started showing up in my room in the middle of the night, sometimes standing by my window or at the end of the bed, sometimes sitting at the foot of my bed. He'd startle me sometimes, but overall was never a negative presence. Eventually he began playing with me, and would even take my toys and hide them in a small room under the main staircase that I was terrified of and never went into. I've always had an overactive imagination, and just treated him as an imaginary friend until my mum was going through a storage closet we hadn't really used and found an old picture of Daniel with his parents, and I told my mum that that was the boy who sits on my bed at night. We ended up moving out of the house, and the house was demolished. But Daniel, perhaps as he had nowhere else to go, ended up following me, and I started seeing him in the new house too. He did the same things he was doing before, taking my possessions and hiding them in strange places, and even showed himself to my best friend and an ex of mine. Nowadays, I mostly see him from the corner of my eyes, almost like he's playing hide and seek with me and being cheeky. Now, I have a near 4-year-old son, who I think may be able to see him too, because I had never told him about Daniel, nor my husband, but out of the blue, my son told me about a little boy who sits in the chair in his room at night, and my husband gave me a similar story about seeing him in my son's chair when he's gone to check in on him in the middle of the night. In a way, it brings me comfort to know that Daniel is happy with me. Maybe he was alone in the big old house. I grew up on a small farm surrounded by forest. It's a small town below a major city in Appalachia. The first incident with this entity was probably when I was around 9 years old. I was in my bedroom at the time, listening to music and playing. My window was open and it was the evening, getting dark, but I could still see outside. I noticed my dad walking by the window stone-faced. I was going to say hello to him but decided not to. Later I mentioned to my mum that I saw Dad pass my window. She informs me that Dad wasn't home, and anyway, my window was too high up for my dad to have been at that height. Mum decides it was probably a bear. We had a lot of hunting dogs that would very often freak out over nothing, but at the time of seeing what I thought was my dad, they weren't upset. I've mentioned this to my significant other before and my friends, and I was talking about our strangest moments, and my significant other tells me to tell them that story, but then tells me he saw something similar when we were visiting my dad in his peripherals. He said it looked like a very tall person but didn't see specific details, but that it walked past the large kitchen window. He meant to tell me earlier, but honestly forgot. It's really weird, and I'm not sure what else to think about, but since my significant other told me he saw it too, I've been trying to research what it might have been. I've also felt creeped out at the thought of going to my dad's again. I've had another experience that I'm not sure what to think of, such as going hiking and finding small shacks in the middle of the woods that are my dad's property, then not finding them again, and my mother calling me from outside while I was playing and telling me she heard me screaming, thinking it was me, but could neither see nor hear me in the yard, and thought a wild animal may have grabbed me. Not sure if it's related, but I figured I'd add it. Perhaps there's something weird going on with the land. When I was around 10, my sister wanted me to sleep in her room. She had a twin bed on both sides of the room, one facing the closet, the other facing the door. I wanted to sleep on the one facing the closet because it had a bunch of plushies, but she insisted I sleep on the one facing the door, so I did. When I woke up in the middle of the night to use the washroom, I saw 3 figures standing at the door, the middle one being the tallest. I just closed my eyes and opened it and they were gone, and I got up to use the washroom. I wasn't afraid. After that, I knew why she wanted me to sleep in her room. My sister still sees spirits to this day, but I think that has to do with fear, which they feed off. She says that when I'm around, nothing happens. Other people say that too, like there's an aura around me. I don't know. I just try and ignore them and not fear them, so they don't bother me. I was with a friend in the summer, shortly after sunset. We were about 15, and we loved exploring the surroundings of our village. I'm French, and we lived in a very rural village with several deep forests around and abandoned houses. We were exploring an abandoned old house. As usual, we joked about the scary atmosphere. We heard a door which opened slowly. Intrigued, we went there and found old family photos from the 19th century. We thought we would go back the next day because it was getting late. The next day, the door was locked and impossible to open. You could feel a feeling of tightness and discomfort. Suddenly we heard a whisper, but we didn't understand what it was saying, so we left. And as we left, we saw a young woman on the first floor window, somewhat obscured by a curtain. After that, we never returned to the house or the area. The story gives me nightmares, and in France it's quite common to find abandoned houses in the forest that have been forgotten to time. This was me 2 years ago, in England, January. I'm a 22-year-old female and had a severe workplace accident and was rushed to hospital. I had a concussion and some nerve damage in my back. A few days later I went home and my mum picked me up. She picked me up around 9 p.m. and our house is around 2 hours away, so it was pretty dark. My mum has always said she felt odd when driving on a specific stretch of road, but I never thought anything of it because I already knew she hated driving at night. We saw a bright red car take over our car, and they were going pretty fast, but nothing was coming towards us, and like I said, it was a straight road, so not that dangerous all things considered. But as it was alongside us, we thought there was going to be a collision, as there was a white truck coming towards it. I gasped and covered my eyes expecting an impact, but there was nothing. The car just carried on like nothing happened. My first instinct was to calm down. Okay, you have a concussion, you're seeing it. I looked over, and my mum, no puns intended, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Even though the car was pretty dim, I could see her knuckles tight on the wheel, her eyes wide. I'm almost certain if the road wasn't straight, we would have crashed because I've never seen her in shock like that before. "Did you see what I saw?" And without hesitation she said, "That car just went through a truck." We were both pretty quiet on the way home, although I noticed she put the radio on probably to distract herself, and she all but jogged into the house from the driveway. All things considered, I still can't explain what we saw. My mum refuses to use that road whenever possible. We've talked about it since, but really can't wrap our heads around it. I woke up from sleep around 3 a.m, and my head was facing the wall. I wanted to fix my posture, so I turned my head facing the middle of the room, and screw it. I am seeing a woman in a hijab and only a torso and a head, no legs or arms 2 feet from me. It was just black darkness floating, but it was so clear because the room wasn't too dark, and I could make out slight details of the hijab and the shoulders. No eyes, no mouth, just dark. "What is this?" I yell out loudly, and wave my hand through the ghost while I'm still laying in bed. It went straight through it, and I felt nothing. A second after my hand went through the ghost, imagine you blew air in a dense circle of floating dust. That's what happened to the ghost. As if something in the middle expanded, distorted the body while vanishing quickly. It is the most vivid encounter I've ever had, and it looked so real. It wasn't my eyes playing tricks on me, and I don't have a mental illness. We purchased our house as a foreclosure, thus pushing a family who had owned it for generations out. We moved in, and things seemed to be normal until my wife and I were talking by the mini wine refrigerator which had baby food stacked on top. 5 baby jars flew off the top of it onto the tile. We were shocked, to say the least. While watching television, vases that we had on the entryway table would slam down with force from across the room. We could hear chains dragging down the hallway. We had a baby girl and a toddler who was 3 at the time. We would be watching the baby monitor and see the light turn on. I went to check to see if the 3-year-old had turned it on. It was quite late, and both were dead asleep. This happened often with the lights. One night we were laying in bed, at the foot of the bed, and I felt and heard a full impression of someone sitting at the edge. We slept with a box fan on the floor, and one night, it was as if the spirit flew behind the fan and released a rotten flesh smell that hit us like a ton of bricks. I was remodeling our master bedroom over the course of months. The shower was not quite finished. One night was pretty late, but I was still awake, and the shower came on by itself. You had to turn the shower on with pliers, and the pliers were present, and it was not easy to make the water come on even with the pliers. My 3-year-old was always talking to someone who she claimed was her imaginary friend. We asked the name of her friend, and it was an old lady's name like Hester. The doors would slam shut on their own. Also, the doors to the outside would open. We were forced to move out. The activity just ramped up over time. It was hell. We were eventually driven out the house. The new owner, whom we developed a fairly friendly relationship with, called me a week after we sold it to him and asked me if we'd ever seen a ghost. He said that he wasn't religious or believed in anything like that. He told me he had counted 7 in one day and was really getting scared. The activity seemed to have ramped up tremendously and aggressively. I know what I did was wrong. We were desperate to sell, and I told him I'd never seen a thing. They moved out soon after. A Hispanic family purchased the property. I reached out and asked them a few years later if they'd seen anything, and they told me no. Now, there are new owners. I left a note in the mailbox for them to call me, and they never reached out. Every word I've said is 100% true. I can't recall every single thing that happened, but it became a daily issue. I hope the activity for the current owners has subsided. The most terrifying night I have ever experienced was when my mother-in-law brought me a night vision scope for Christmas. We had a lot of deer that would come through the backyard. I shut off all the lights in the house and opened up the back door hoping to see a deer. What I saw was a full-blown skeleton in detail 10 yards away. I could make out all the details, ribs, eye sockets, teeth, everything. The skeleton noticed me and slowly turned its head and made eye contact with me, or socket contact. It transformed into a ball of energy and bounced away. I immediately walked to exactly where it was standing and looked through the French doors to my bedroom as my wife was laying in bed. I lost it after that. Still don't know what to do with this information. In 2021, I was sleeping in my room. I suddenly woke up and there was a shadowy entity at the foot of my bed. I scrambled to turn the light on. When I turned it on, the door was open and I heard running away. The door was shut when I fell asleep. I thought it was one of my siblings, but I saw through the entity. The next night I woke up to a cold presence near me. Suddenly I felt a hand on my throat almost choking me. I got up and went to the corner. When I turned, I saw a shadowy-looking woman entity standing there. When I walked to get my stick of incense, it vanished. I took the stick of incense and lit it, then smudged my room and went to the bed, leaving it on. Everything died down for a week, and then when I was sleeping, I heard a screech. I got up and went to my mum's room in a panic. No one heard that sound, only me. I felt so helpless and scared. I slept on the couch for a week and finally tried to sleep in my room. Everything's okay now. I haven't seen the shadowy figure since, and everyone still thinks I'm a nutjob. I'm not a believer in the paranormal. I just don't know what I saw that night. I used to work at a mental facility wing in a hospital built over some wetlands. I oversaw roughly 4 psych floors. The history of the place was long. It used to be a hospice wing. There's a cemetery right over the hill the wing overlooks, and surrounded by thick forests and wetlands. No homes or anything for miles. Anyway, I was in the cafeteria with some patients who wanted a midnight meal. Suddenly, one of the patients standing by the bay windows points down into the swamp and asks, "Hey, should I open the door for him?" There was a wet-looking man down in the swamp maybe 10 to 15 feet below us, his pale face illuminated by the lights of the cafeteria. He was thin and lanky, and just staring blankly up at us. I immediately radioed security thinking it was a trespasser, or God forbid, an escaped patient of ours. The patient saw him. I saw him, but the security guards and cameras didn't. After I radioed security for a head count, all of our patients were accounted for. That man, whoever he was, wasn't one of ours. That creepy night is unforgettable. That facility was odd. Things like this happened all the time that simply could not be explained. A few years ago, I constructed a shooting range for my airsofts in the attic. It was night, so the only light source was the dim light I put next to my target, and I was the only person in the attic. So I was shooting with my airsoft and then something slapped my neck. I was shocked for a while, but after some time looked around to see if there was something there, but I didn't find anything else there beside me. I then picked up my torchlight to search through the attic if there was any kind of animal there, but I found nothing either. I'm sure what slapped me felt like a human hand, and I even heard the typical slapping sound. The door was closed, and no one could come upstairs without me noticing. There is this story my grandma told me, that a woman in the 90s that was one of the tenants of the house took her life in the attic via rope. I don't know if it was her, but it was my favorite explanation for what happened to me. I still shoot in the attic, but nothing strange has happened since. I just rarely shoot at night because of what happened to me that time. This incident took place a few years ago, when I was still in primary school. Back then, my family and I were still living in one of the flats in Jurong West. There is a large canal behind our HDB block, and there is a secondary school. I believe it has already merged with another secondary school near my block. And since it's the Hungry Ghost Festival now, I thought it would be the perfect time to share this story. Since I was young, my family made a point to prepare offerings during the Ghost Month, and we always prepare the offerings facing the canal. After doing what we were told, my siblings and I loved playing at the canal area where we played catching and sometimes spot fishes, although we couldn't really see any. Over the years, nothing much really happened, until something eventually did. As usual, we started playing after placing the offerings, and since I was already older, I knew about a lot more things. I read somewhere that you could see ghosts if you look between your legs, which is a common Asian belief. I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought it would be the best situation to try out this myth. I took a deep breath and decided to do it. I spread my legs apart and looked between them. My view was the offerings that were placed earlier, but I didn't see anything. In my mind, I thought to myself, my parents are liars. Why are there no ghosts? Although I didn't see anything, little did I know I have influenced my younger brother. The next thing I saw was my younger brother mimicking my actions while giggling to himself. Since nothing happened to me, I thought it would be the same for him, but I was wrong. His giggling turned into a loud cry. He started shouting, "Buyao," repeatedly while crying, which translates to "I don't want." As soon as he began crying, all the candle lights faded, and even though there was no wind. As usual, I was laughing because my dumb mind thought he was joking. Not long later, my parents came in and I got an arse whooping for influencing my younger brother. After much consoling done by my parents, my little brother opened up to us. He said that it was crowded and there were many people squatting. What I remember was him describing a large group of people squatting around the offering and began moving towards him when he looked in between his legs. After hearing that, I couldn't sleep the whole night because I was scared about those things following us home and were watching me sleep. Although nothing paranormal happened at night, my parents brought us to the temple to cleanse ourselves and rid us of negative energy. I moved homes a few years later and saw some articles claiming that the area was supposedly haunted. Maybe that's the reason why I had chills at the time. But thankfully nothing happened to me. My husband and I were in Deadwood and did the haunted tour at the Fairmont. Early in the tour guide brought us to a room and had us sit down while explaining the history of the building. She explained the room we were in didn't typically have any activity, so it was a good place to chat. As she's telling me about some of the deaths in the building, I suddenly feel about 3 to 5 strands of my hair right along the top part of my head get pulled straight up and out of my head. I turn around and suddenly smacked my husband, but he was confused. I didn't say anything to the tour guide or other people on the tour because I was convinced my husband was playing a joke on me. But he swore up and down he hadn't touched me. By the end of the tour, I started to believe him, but I began questioning myself. Did I want something to happen so bad I made it up in my head? But I know I didn't, because I could still feel the sting of where the hairs had been ripped out. That feeling lingers on, and I know I couldn't have imagined it. So if anyone else has had a hair-pulling experience in Deadwood, you aren't alone. This next story happened when I was a child, in 5th grade. My parents had gone out for the night and I was home alone. I had our house phone and was on the phone talking to my best friend. There was a hallway with the computer room on one side and the bathroom on the other, and my parents' room at the end of the hallway. I'm in the computer room with the light off, but I had the hallway light on. I was standing by the window in the dark computer room, leaning against the ledge and absently looking across to our neighbor's house while talking on the phone. The neighbors had a window with a lamp on, but the blinds were closed, so it was just a soft yellow glow, and that's all I could see. Suddenly, as I'm talking, I see in the reflection of the window that I'm leaning against a man in a red flannel shirt walk down the hallway from my parents' room, past the computer room I'm in. And clear as day I saw this. I can still picture it now. My dog was in the room with me. He was a big, German, short-haired pointer and was the ultimate guard dog. I got scared and hung up the phone, but I don't know what to do. So I decided that I would run across the hallway into the bathroom and lock the door until I calmed down. I wanted to bring my dog, but as soon as we got to the doorway by the hall, my dog dug his paws in, put his hackles up, and started growling at the hallway. He wouldn't move. At this point, I started crying and gave him one big yank on his collar, and he took off and ran, without me, straight into the bathroom. I went in after him, closed the door, and calmed myself down. Then my friend called me back to hang up on her and I explained everything. I don't think she believed me. No one else was home, my parents didn't come back early, and my stepdad didn't even own a red flannel shirt. I have no clue who I saw, but I saw him, full-bodied, and would give anything to go back to that house for a night and do a ghost hunt. My wife and I had part of our honeymoon in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we stayed at the Reed House Hotel. According to the history of the land, one of the previous buildings that stood there was an inn that had been used as a hospital during the Civil War. One night, while my wife and I were laying in bed, she had fallen asleep already, and I was lying there watching television. It was March and still cold outside, but the blankets were thick and warm, and I was getting hot, so I had one of my legs sticking out from under the covers. As I'm laying there, I could feel a hand wrap its finger around my lower leg, give a gentle squeeze, and let go. I neither saw nor heard anything, and I was looking past my leg to see the TV. So if there would have been an apparition of some sort, I would have been looking directly at it. But nothing appeared before me. It was unmistakably a hand that squeezed my leg. I could feel each finger individually make contact with my leg, as if someone was rolling their fingers onto my leg, with each finger making individual contact one after the other before the gentle squeeze. I've heard that at times like this, you can kind of sense the intention of a spirit, and I felt neither fear nor malicious intent in the touch. It was almost as if someone wanted to tell me hello and let me know that they were there. My wife and I had a few more nights at the hotel before we left for our next destination, and I chose not to tell her about it till after we left. I didn't want to scare her. Once I told her, she told me of something she also witnessed, but what was odd was that she dismissed it in that moment. The bedroom was a corner room and had 2 windows with curtains that hung to the floor. While I showered on a previous night, from left to right, the curtains swayed as if someone was walking around the foot of the bed and dragging their hand along them. She dismissed it as a breeze until she heard my story. Years ago, I worked in a secured building for over a decade. The entry had a wireless doorbell inside a locked plated glass vestibule along with motion-activated lights. The building had a long history of ghost sightings and odd occurrences of objects being pushed off counters, voices whispering in people's ears, and women's hair being touched from behind, and human-like images walking through closed doors. Unfortunately, I never witnessed any of these events. But on my last night on the job, there was a small gathering of my co-workers and the topic of ghosts was mentioned. I said that I had never seen the ghost, and I believed the stories but had just never seen anything. Immediately, after I had finished that sentence, the doorbell rang and the motion sensor lights turned on, but no one was inside the vestibule. The motion lights would activate occasionally without cause, but never the doorbell. We all stared in quiet amazement. Given my comment and the immediate event, I felt the ghost was pranking me and wishing me well after a lengthy term inside the business, and a little parting goodbye. This was when I was younger, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I've had many strange encounters all my life, but this one has always stuck out to me. Around the summer of 2005, I used to live with my family in a decently occupied society, which was a little further away from the main city, so a suburb, I guess. My summer vacation was going on, and I spent most of my afternoon roaming around my house, listening to MTV and just playing around on my PC. One day I was going to my kitchen, which was at the end of a corridor from my room, and the beginning of the corridor from the front door, right opposite my living room. When I was crossing, I saw a shadow of an incredibly tall man. I knew it was a man as the silhouette of it looked very masculine and strong. I can't really say it was a shadow though, as I could see he was wearing an overcoat and a hat, almost like a mix of Mad Men outfit and Men in Black. I saw it constantly in broad daylight, but never felt that scared of it. It changed its position quite a few times in the living room, but always in the living room. A week after seeing this, my grandmother had passed away, and the shadow vanished too. My grandmother's body was brought into the living room where it was on ice or some sort of ritual after we cremated her. I always thought maybe it was just my imagination, but very recently, maybe like 3 years ago, my younger cousin asked if I saw something like this in my house. I was shocked as I'd never mentioned it to her, and she had seen it in my house too. It was freaky, but became a core memory.